The desert didn't forgive, and it sure as hell didn't forget. Rhett Vance knew that better than most. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, the sun hammering down on his shoulders like the fist of something vengeful, something patient. His horse, a gray mare with eyes that had seen too much, moved with the tired rhythm of a creature that understood suffering as a language. Dust clung to everything: his coat, his hat, the rifle strapped to his saddle. Even his thoughts felt gritty, worn down by miles of nothing but sand and sky. The frontier was a graveyard of dreams. Out here, ambition dried up faster than water in a cracked canteen. Towns rose and fell like fever dreams, and the people who survived them learned to keep their heads down, their mouths shut, and their hands close to their guns. Rhett had no illusions about any of it. He'd stopped believing in fresh starts the day he buried the last person who'd given a damn about him. That was 7 years ago. Now he was just a shadow passing through other people's nightmares. A man with no past worth remembering and no future worth planning. The only thing he carried besides his weapons was the weight of too many ghosts, and even they had stopped talking to him. The town of Ember Ridge appeared on the horizon like a bruise on the landscape. It wasn't much to look at. A scattering of sun-bleached buildings huddled together against the emptiness, connected by dirt streets that looked like open wounds. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, thin and hesitant, as if even the fires here were afraid to burn too bright. The place had the feel of something half-abandoned, a settlement clinging to existence out of stubbornness rather than hope. Rhett pulled the mare to a stop on a low ridge overlooking the town. From this distance, he could see the whole miserable layout: a main street lined with sagging storefronts, a church with a crooked steeple, a handful of houses scattered like dice someone had thrown and forgotten. At the far end of town sat a larger building, 2 stories tall, with a faded sign he couldn't quite read from here. A saloon, probably. There was always a saloon. He sat there for a long moment, letting his eyes adjust to the details. Old habits. A smart man studied a place before he walked into it, and Rhett Vance had stayed alive this long by being smart, even when he hadn't been particularly good. Movement caught his eye. A wagon rolling down the main street, moving too fast for the rutted road. Even from a distance, he could see the driver whipping the horses, pushing them hard. Behind the wagon, 3 riders followed at an easy pace, their posture casual, almost lazy. They weren't chasing the wagon, they were herding it. Rhett's jaw tightened. He knew that kind of riding. Predators toying with prey. The wagon hit a deep rut and nearly tipped. A crate tumbled from the back, smashing open in the street. The driver didn't stop, couldn't stop probably, but one of the riders did. He dismounted, kicked through the spilled contents with his boot, then laughed. The sound didn't carry all the way to the ridge, but Rhett could imagine it. He'd heard that kind of laughter before, the kind that came from men who'd forgotten what it meant to be afraid. The other 2 riders caught up to the wagon at the edge of town and forced it to a halt. The driver, a man in worn overalls, hat pulled low, climbed down slowly, hands raised. One of the riders dismounted and shoved him. The man stumbled but didn't fall, didn't fight back either, just stood there, shoulders slumped, while the riders circled him like wolves. Rhett watched it all with the detached interest of someone who'd seen the same scene play out 100 times in 100 different towns. The names changed, the faces changed, the outcome never did. He should keep riding, that was the smart play. Whatever was happening down there in Ember Ridge wasn't his problem. He had no stake in this place, no reason to care whether these people lived or died or spent the rest of their lives under someone's boot. Getting involved would be stupid, dangerous. The kind of mistake that got a man killed, or worse, tied him down to something he couldn't walk away from. Rhett Vance was good at walking away. He gathered the reins, ready to turn the mare north and leave Ember Ridge in the dust where it belonged. But he didn't move. Something held him there on that ridge, something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the way the man in the overalls stood with his hands raised, defeated before the fight even started. Maybe it was the casual cruelty of the riders, the easy violence that came from knowing nobody would stop them. Or maybe it was just the fact that Rhett was tired, bone deep, soul tired, of running from things that followed him anyway. He nudged the mare forward, down the slope toward Ember Ridge. The town didn't look any better up close. The buildings were worse than he'd thought. Warped wood, broken windows, roofs patched with whatever scraps people could find. Poverty hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. A few faces appeared in doorways as he rode past, eyes following him with the wary, hunted look of people who'd learned to expect the worst. Nobody greeted him. Nobody asked his business. They just watched, silent and still, like rabbits trying not to attract the hawk's attention. The confrontation at the edge of town had moved to the main street. The wagon sat abandoned, one wheel splintered, the horses still in their traces and breathing hard. The man in overalls was on his knees now, hands behind his head, while two of the riders stood over him. The third was going through the wagon, tossing aside bundles of dried goods and laughing every time something broke. Rhett dismounted a dozen yards away and tied the mare to a hitching post outside what might have once been a general store. The building was dark inside, the windows too dirty to see through, but he could feel eyes on him from somewhere in the shadows. "That's far enough, friend." The voice came from one of the riders, a tall man with a drooping mustache and a tin star pinned to his vest. Sheriff's badge. Rhett had seen enough fake lawmen to recognize one at 50 paces. This one had the look of someone who'd bought or stolen his authority and wore it like armor against accountability. Rhett stopped walking but didn't raise his hands. Didn't know there was a distance requirement for standing on a public street. The tall man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Public street, private business. You do well to remember the difference. I'll keep that in mind. You do that. The fake sheriff tilted his head, studying Rhett with the kind of calculating look predators use to size up potential threats. Don't recognize you, passing through. That's right. Figured. We don't get many visitors these days. Most folks with sense steer clear of Ember Ridge. He said it like a warning wrapped in casual conversation. You got business here, or are you just stopping for water? Haven't decided yet. The other two riders had stopped what they were doing to watch this exchange. One of them, a stocky man with a scar running down the left side of his face, rested his hand on the butt of his pistol. Not drawing, just making the threat clear. The man in overalls was still on his knees, breathing hard, his face pale with fear or exhaustion or both. He didn't look at Rhett, didn't look at anything, just stared at the dirt like it held answers he was too afraid to speak out loud. "Well," the fake sheriff said, stretching the word out, "if you're looking for a place to rest, we got a boarding house 2 blocks down. Meals are extra, and the sheets ain't clean, but it's better than sleeping in the dirt." Appreciate the recommendation. That's what I'm here for, serving and protecting. The smile got wider, colder. Now, if you'll excuse us, we got official business to conclude, tax collection, civic duty, and all that. Rhett glanced at the broken wagon, the scattered goods, the terrified man on his knees. Looks more like theft to me. The words hung in the air like a challenge. The street went very quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The fake sheriff's smile disappeared. "You want to repeat that?" "I don't stutter." The stocky man with the scar took a step forward. The third rider, younger, eager, with the kind of nervous energy that came from wanting to prove something, moved to flank Rhett from the left. Classic formation. They'd done this before, probably dozens of times. Corner the stranger, make him back down, or make an example of him. Rhett didn't move, didn't touch his gun, just stood there, weight balanced, eyes steady, radiating the kind of calm that came from a man who'd stared down death so many times they were on a first-name basis. "I'm going to give you one chance," the fake sheriff said slowly, "to apologize, mount up, and ride out of here like none of this happened. That's generous, considering you just insulted a lawman in the performance of his duties." "Generous," Rhett repeated. "That what you call it." The young one's hand dropped to his pistol. Fast. Too fast. The kind of speed that came from fear rather than skill. Rhett moved faster. His hand was a blur. There one moment, gripping the Colt at his hip the next. The motion was so smooth, so practiced, it looked almost lazy. But the barrel was leveled at the young rider before the kid's gun had cleared leather, and the hammer was cocked before anyone could blink. The street froze. "Easy," Rhett said quietly. His voice carried in the silence, soft but absolute. "Real easy now." The young rider's face went white. His hand hovered over his half-drawn pistol, trembling, caught between pride and survival. The stocky man with the scar had gone very still, his own weapon forgotten. Even the fake sheriff looked momentarily off balance, his confidence cracking around the edges. Rhett hadn't aimed at any of them specifically. The Colt pointed somewhere in the middle distance, ready to swing toward whoever made the first move. That was the genius of it. They all knew he could drop any one of them before the others could react. The only question was who wanted to be first. Nobody volunteered. "Here's how this is going to work," Rhett said, his tone conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "You three are going to step back. That man on his knees is going to stand up, get back in his wagon, or what's left of it, and finish whatever errand brought him to town. And I'm going to forget I saw any of this." He paused. "Sound fair?" The fake sheriff's jaw worked, chewing on words he didn't dare speak. His eyes flicked to his companions, measuring odds, calculating risks. 3 against 1 should have been easy, but easy required certainty, and the only certainty here was that Rhett Vance was still standing, while their confidence bled out into the dirt. "You're making a mistake," the fake sheriff finally said. His voice was tight, controlled, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. "You don't know who you're dealing with. Then educate me. This town belongs to Mr. Kane, everything in it, everyone in it. And nobody interferes with Mr. Kane's business." "Mr. Kane," Rhett repeated. "That's supposed to scare me." "If you had sense, yeah. Lucky for you, I left my sense a few hundred miles back." Rhett gestured with the Colt, a small motion that nevertheless made all 3 men flinch. "Now step back." They didn't move. Pride and fear warred on their faces, visible as scars. The fake sheriff opened his mouth, probably to issue some threat, some final warning, but a voice cut through the tension before he could speak. "Let him go, Clayton." The words came from the 2-story building at the end of the street, the saloon Rhett had spotted from the ridge. A woman stood on the covered porch, arms crossed, her silhouette framed by the doorway behind her. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about her posture, something that demanded attention. The fake sheriff, Clayton, turned to look at her, irritation flashing across his face. "This doesn't concern you, Mara. When it happens in front of my place, it concerns me." She started walking toward them, boots clicking against the boards, then crunching in the dirt of the street. As she got closer, Rhett could make out more details. Dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, eyes sharp as broken glass, a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so guarded. She wore a simple dress, dark blue and dusty, but she moved with the confidence of someone who'd fought for every inch of ground she stood on. Clayton's hand drifted toward his gun. "You want to be real careful about getting involved here." Mara stopped a few feet away, her gaze sweeping over the scene. The broken wagon, the kneeling man, the 3 riders, and finally Rhett, still holding his Colt with that deceptive calm. Something flickered in her eyes when she looked at him. Recognition, maybe, or just calculation. "Joseph," she said, not taking her eyes off Rhett, "get up and get your wagon out of the street. You can sort through what's salvageable at my place." The man in overalls, Joseph, glanced at Clayton, then at Mara, his face caught between relief and terror. He didn't move. "I said get up." Mara's voice hardened. "You work for me, not them. Move." This time Joseph obeyed. He climbed to his feet slowly, his legs shaking, and stumbled toward the wagon. Nobody stopped him. The riders watched him go, their expressions dark with frustration, but they didn't interfere. Mara turned her attention to Clayton. "You got your fun for the day. Time to move along. We got business to finish." "Not today, you don't." Clayton's face flushed red. "You think you can just order me around? You think because you run that whorehouse you got some kind of authority here?" "It's a saloon," Mara said evenly. "And yeah, I think I can. Because the last time you and your boys got too rough with one of my suppliers, it took me 3 weeks to get another shipment. I can't afford 3 more weeks. So unless you want to explain to Mr. Kane why his favorite whiskey runs dry, you'll back off and let Joseph do his job." The mention of Kane's name shifted something. Clayton's anger didn't disappear, but it got buried under a layer of cold pragmatism. He glanced at the wagon, most of its contents already destroyed, then back at Mara. "Fine," he said, "but this ain't over. And you," he pointed at Rhett, "you just made yourself a problem." Rhett holstered his Colt with the same smooth motion he'd drawn it. "I've been a problem before. I'll manage." Clayton spat in the dirt, then jerked his head at the other 2 riders. "Come on, we're done here." They mounted up, the young one still looking pale, the scarred man glaring at Rhett like he was memorizing his face for later. Clayton took one last look at Mara, something personal and poisonous in his eyes, then spurred his horse and rode off. The other 2 followed, raising dust that hung in the air long after they'd disappeared around the corner. The street stayed quiet for a beat. Then two. Then someone coughed from inside one of the buildings, and the spell broke. Doors creaked open. Faces appeared in windows. The town exhaled, cautious and slow. Mara walked over to where Joseph was trying to salvage what he could from the wagon. She said something to him in a low voice, too quiet for Rhett to hear, and Joseph nodded shakily. Then she turned and started walking back toward the saloon. She paused after a few steps and looked back at Rhett. "You coming, or you planning to stand in the street until Clayton comes back with reinforcements?" Rhett considered the question. The smart move was still to ride out, put Ember Ridge in the rear view, and forget any of this happened. But smart had stopped being his compass a long time ago, and there was something about the way Mara looked at him, not grateful, not afraid, just measuring, that made him curious. He untied the mare and followed her toward the saloon. The building was called the Broken Wheel, according to the faded sign creaking above the door. Inside, it was dim and smelled like whiskey, tobacco, and old wood. A bar ran along one wall, scratched and stained but solid. A few tables scattered across the floor, most of them empty. A staircase in the back led up to the second floor, where Rhett assumed the rooms were. Mara went behind the bar and pulled out a bottle and 2 glasses without asking if he wanted one. She poured them both a generous measure, slid one across the bar to him, and downed hers in a single swallow. Rhett picked up his glass but didn't drink. That was a risk, stepping in like that. Everything's a risk these days. She poured herself another. "You new to taking stupid chances, or is this just another Tuesday for you?" "Somewhere in between." She studied him over the rim of her glass. "You got a name, or should I just call you the idiot who pulled a gun on Clayton Burke?" "Rhett Vance." "Mara Hale." She set the glass down. "And before you ask, yes, this place is mine. Or it was. Depends on how you count ownership when someone's trying to take it from you piece by piece." "Kane." "Smart. Yeah, Kane. He runs this whole valley like it's his personal kingdom. Owns the land, the businesses, the law, such as it is. Clayton's his dog. Does the dirty work, keeps people in line, makes sure everyone remembers who's in charge. Sounds like a hell of a town. Used to be better. 5 years ago, this place had hope. Trade routes, decent crops, people who gave a damn about each other. Then Kane showed up with his money and his muscle, and everything went to shit. Now most folks are just trying to survive long enough to get out, or waiting to die quietly." Rhett finally took a sip of the whiskey. It was rough, but honest. The kind of burn that reminded you were still alive. "Why don't you leave?" Mara's laugh was bitter. "Leave? With what? I got nothing but this building and the dirt it's standing on, and even that's barely mine. Kane's been squeezing me for months, raising my taxes, making sure my suppliers get roughed up, driving away customers. He wants me broke and desperate, so I'll sell for nothing. Then he'll turn this place into another one of his operations." She refilled her glass. "I'm not giving him the satisfaction. Stubborn." "Damn right." Her eyes met his, hard and unflinching. "So what's your story, Rhett Vance? You ride into a dying town, pull iron on 3 armed men, and now you're drinking my whiskey like it's nothing. You running from something or toward it?" "Neither, just passing through." "Nobody just passes through Ember Ridge. It's 50 miles from anywhere worth going. You came here on purpose, or you're lost." "Maybe both." She didn't push, just watched him with that same measuring look, like she was trying to decide if he was worth the trouble of trusting. Outside, the sound of Joseph's wagon creaking down the street filtered through the walls, the town settling back into its uneasy rhythm. "You should leave," Mara said finally. "Tonight, if you're smart. Clayton won't forget what you did out there. And when he tells Kane, things are going to get worse. For me or for you?" "Both." Rhett finished his whiskey and set the glass down. "I'll think about it." "Thinking's not enough. You don't know these people. Kane's not just some bully with a gang. He's methodical, patient. He'll wait until you're comfortable, until you think maybe you've got a chance, and then he'll crush you. I've seen it happen a dozen times." "Then why are you still here?" The question hung between them, sharp and honest. Mara opened her mouth, closed it, then poured herself another drink instead of answering. Rhett turned to leave, then paused. "You said this place used to have hope. What killed it? Kane, or the people who let him win?" Mara's hand tightened around the glass. "Get out." He almost smiled. Almost. Then he walked out into the fading light, leaving her alone with her whiskey and her ghosts. Well, the boarding house was exactly as bad as advertised. The room smelled like mildew and regret. The bed sagged in the middle like a broken spine, and the window didn't close all the way, letting in a cold draft that carried the scent of smoke and dust. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, which was more than Rhett had expected. He lay on the bed fully clothed, boots still on, Colt within easy reach on the nightstand. Sleep didn't come easy these days. Too many years of sleeping light, one ear always listening for footsteps, or the creak of a floorboard, or the click of a hammer being drawn back. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Voices drifted through the walls, low and indistinct. The town settling in for another night of fear masquerading as normalcy. Rhett stared at the ceiling and thought about riding out at first light. He should. There was nothing for him here. Marahale's problems weren't his problems. Clayton Burke and this man Kane, whoever he was, weren't his fight. The smart play, the only play, was to disappear before things got messier. But that moment in the street kept replaying in his mind. The way Joseph had knelt there, defeated before the fight started. The casual cruelty in Clayton's eyes. The resignation in Mara's voice when she talked about people waiting to die quietly. Rhett had seen it all before. Hell, he'd been it before. The man who kept his head down, who survived by not making waves, who told himself that other people's suffering wasn't his responsibility. It hadn't saved him. Hadn't saved anyone he cared about. Maybe it never did. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, knowing he wouldn't, knowing that by morning he'd have to make a choice he'd already made the moment he rode down from that ridge. Somewhere in the darkness, Ember Ridge held its breath and waited for the storm. Dawn came slow and reluctant, bleeding gray light through the gaps in the window. Rhett had slept maybe 2 hours, his body finally surrendering to exhaustion sometime around 4 in the morning. Now he sat on the edge of the bed, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness, listening to Ember Ridge wake up around him. The sounds were muted, careful. Doors opening quietly. Footsteps that didn't quite run but moved with purpose. Voices kept low, like the town itself was afraid of being overheard. It was the sound of a place that had learned to be small, to take up as little space as possible, in the hope that trouble might pass it by. Rhett strapped on his gun belt, checked the Colt's chambers out of habit, and headed downstairs. The boarding house owner, a dried-up woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that had stopped asking questions years ago, was sweeping the front step when he emerged. She glanced at him once, nodded toward a pot of coffee sitting on a table inside, and went back to her sweeping without a word. He poured himself a cup. The coffee was bitter enough to strip paint, but it was hot and it pushed back the fog in his head. He drank it standing by the window, watching the street come to life in fits and starts. A man led a mule past, both of them moving with the same tired resignation. 2 women hurried by with baskets, their heads down, not talking. Across the way, someone was boarding up a broken window, the sound of hammer on nails echoing in the morning quiet. No sign of Clayton or his men. But Rhett could feel their presence anyway, hanging over the town like smoke. He finished the coffee, left a few coins on the table, and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, almost pleasant, carrying the smell of dust and something cooking, bread, maybe, or beans. His stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since yesterday, but food could wait. First, he needed to understand what he'd walked into. Towns like this had rhythms, patterns. You learned to read them, or you didn't last long. He started walking, no particular direction, just letting his feet carry him through the streets. Most of the buildings were in worse shape than the broken wheel. Sagging roofs, walls patched with whatever scraps people could find, paint so faded you couldn't tell what color it had been originally. But here and there, a few structures stood out, newer, sturdier, built with money that didn't match the poverty around them. Kane's holdings, probably. Markers of his control. A church sat at the edge of town, its steeple crooked like a broken finger pointing at the sky. The door hung open and Rhett could see pews inside, most of them empty except for one old man sitting in the front row, head bowed. Praying or sleeping, hard to tell. Past the church, a cluster of houses formed something like a neighborhood. Families, from the look of it, laundry hanging on lines, a few scrawny chickens pecking in the dirt, a child's toy abandoned in a yard. But even here the air felt heavy. Windows stayed shuttered. People moved quickly from door to door, not lingering, not gathering. Fear was a contagion. It spread easy and settled deep. Rhett turned a corner and found himself facing a large building that dominated the north end of town. 2 stories, brick construction, with bars on the windows and a heavy door reinforced with iron. A sign above the entrance read, Kane Enterprises, in letters that had been painted recently enough to still look sharp. So this was the heart of it, the center of the web. He stood there for a moment, studying the building. No guards visible, but that didn't mean much. Places like this didn't need obvious security when the whole town knew better than to cause trouble. I wouldn't stare too long if I were you. The voice came from behind him. Rhett turned to find an older man leaning against the wall of the adjacent building, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. He was maybe 60, weathered and lean, with the kind of face that had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. Free country, Rhett said. Last I checked. The old man snorted. Not in Ember Ridge, it ain't. Here, you look at that building too long, someone notices. Someone always notices. You noticed. That's different. I'm old. Nobody cares what I see. He brushed wood shavings off his lap. You're the one pulled iron on Clayton yesterday. Whole town's talking about it. That right? Yep, half of them think you're crazy. Other half think you're stupid. Me, I figure you're probably both. He squinted at Rhett. Question is, you planning to stick around long enough for it to matter? Rhett didn't answer immediately. He was still trying to decide that himself. The old man seemed to take his silence as confirmation. Thought so. Well, let me give you some advice, free of charge. Whatever you're thinking, helping folks, standing up to Kane, being some kind of hero, forget it. This town's already dead. We're just waiting for someone to bury us. Cheerful. Realistic. You want cheerful, try the next town over, assuming there is one. He went back to his whittling. Kane's got this place locked down tighter than a coffin. He owns the land, the water rights, the supply routes. Anyone tries to leave, they find out real quick they got nowhere to go and no way to get there. Anyone tries to fight, they end up in a shallow grave or wishing they had. And nobody pushes back. The old man's knife paused. We did. Once. 3 years ago, a group of us got together, figured we'd pool our money, buy out Kane's contracts, take back what was ours. Even had a lawyer from the county come in to help us file the paperwork. He resumed whittling, but his hands moved slower now. Lawyer disappeared on his way back. Never made it to the county seat. Kane said it was bandits. We knew better. What happened to the group? Some left, some gave up, some had accidents. The old man's voice was flat, drained of emotion. I was one of the smart ones. Kept my head down, kept breathing. Not proud of it, but I'm still here. Rhett looked back at the brick building. This Kane. He ever show his face, or does he run things from the shadows? Oh, he shows up. Every few weeks, rides in with his entourage like he's royalty inspecting his kingdom. Stays in that building, conducts his business, makes sure everyone remembers who's in charge. Then he leaves again. The old man spat in the dirt. Man's got operations all over the territory. Ember Ridge is just one piece of his empire. To him, we're numbers on a ledger. Nothing more. Where's he now? Last I heard, over in Copper Bend, 60 miles west, but he'll be back. He always comes back. The old man folded his knife and tucked it into his pocket. You want my advice? Be long gone before he does. Rhett nodded slowly, filing the information away. Appreciate the talk. Don't mention it. Literally, I got enough trouble without Clayton thinking I'm conspiring with outsiders. He pushed off the wall and shuffled away, hunched and slow, just another broken piece of a broken town. Rhett stood there a minute longer, then turned and headed back toward the main street. He found the broken wheel already open, though it was barely past 8 in the morning. Mara was behind the bar, stacking bottles with mechanical precision, her movements efficient and joyless. She didn't look up when he walked in. We're not serving yet, she said. Not here for a drink. Then what do you want? Rhett pulled out a chair and sat down at one of the tables. Information. That got her attention. She turned, arms crossed, one eyebrow raised. About what? Kane. His operation. How he runs things. Mara's expression hardened. Why? You planning to do something stupid? Haven't decided yet. She let out a sharp breath, somewhere between a laugh and a curse. You are crazy. I knew it the second I saw you pull that gun. Normal people don't do what you did. Normal people don't survive long out here. Neither do heroes. She grabbed a rag and started wiping down the bar, more for something to do than because it needed cleaning. You want to know how Kane runs things? Simple. He controls the resources, water, land, trade routes. You want a farm, you lease from him. You want to ship goods, you use his wagons. You want to drink, you buy his liquor. Every transaction, he takes a cut. Every business, he owns a piece of. And if someone refuses, they don't, not anymore. He made examples of the ones who tried. She threw the rag down. Look, I appreciate what you did yesterday with Joseph. I do. But picking a fight with Clayton is one thing. Going after Kane is suicide. He's got money, men, influence. He's connected to people in the territorial government. You're one man with a gun and too much pride. You're still here, Rhett pointed out. Still fighting. I'm not fighting. I'm just not surrendering. There's a difference. She poured herself a drink even though it was early. This place is all I have left. My father built it from nothing, spent 20 years making it work. When he died, he left it to me because he knew I'd protect it. And I have. But I'm not winning, Rhett. I'm just losing slower than everyone else. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Rhett leaned back in his chair. How bad is it, financially? Mara hesitated, then sighed. Bad. Kane's been bleeding me dry. Raised my protection fees 3 times this year. My suppliers, the ones who haven't been scared off, charge double because they know I'm desperate. Half the rooms upstairs are empty because nobody comes to this town anymore unless they're working for Kane. I'm maybe 2 months from being flat broke. And then? Then Kane offers to buy me out for pennies on the dollar. I say no. He has Clayton and his boys make my life hell until I have no choice. She downed the drink. It's the same story he's used a dozen times. I'm just the latest chapter. Rhett was quiet for a moment, thinking. What if you had leverage? Leverage? Against Kane? She almost laughed. Like what? I don't know yet. But men like him, they always have weak points. Something they care about more than money. Something they can't afford to lose. Mara shook her head. You really don't get it. Kane doesn't have weak points. He's been doing this for years. He's careful, methodical. By the time you figure out his game, it's already over. Then maybe it's time someone changed the rules. She stared at him like he'd just suggested they could fly. You're serious? I'm considering it. Why? The question came out sharp, almost angry. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe this town anything. Why would you risk your life for people you don't even know? Rhett didn't have a good answer for that. Or maybe he had too many, all of them tangled up in years of running and regret and the weight of ghosts that followed him everywhere he went. Maybe I'm tired of walking away, he said finally. Mara studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then she turned and grabbed a bottle from the shelf, something better than the rotgut she'd served him yesterday. If you're going to do something stupid, she said, pouring 2 glasses, at least do it with decent whiskey in your system. They drank in silence. Outside, the sound of a wagon rolling past, voices calling to each other. The ordinary sounds of a town pretending it wasn't dying. Rhett was halfway through his second glass when the door swung open hard enough to bang against the wall. Clayton Burke stood in the doorway, flanked by the same 2 men from yesterday, the scarred one and the young, eager one. But this time, there were 3 more behind them, 6 in total, all armed. The saloon went very quiet. Clayton stepped inside, his boots loud on the wooden floor. His tin star caught the light from the window, glinting like a warning. The smile on his face was cold and satisfied, the look of a man who'd been waiting for this moment and was going to savor it. Well, well, he said, look who's still here. I figured you'd have the sense to run by now. Rhett set down his glass slowly. Didn't stand, didn't reach for his gun, just sat there, calm as stone. Morning, Sheriff. You here for breakfast? Or is this a social call? The young one snickered. Clayton shot him a look that shut him up immediately. This is official business, Clayton said. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. Got a warrant here. Seems there was an incident yesterday involving threats made against a duly appointed lawman. Assault with a deadly weapon, disturbing the peace. That's creative, Rhett said. Any of that actually true? Don't matter what's true. Matters What's written down? Clayton's smile widened. You're under arrest. Mara stepped out from behind the bar. Clayton, you know damn well. Stay out of this, Mara. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. You're manufacturing charges. I said stay out of it. Clayton's hand dropped to his gun, not drawing but making the threat clear. Unless you want to be arrested for obstruction. Mara's face flushed with anger, but she held her ground. You can't just, I can do whatever I want. I'm the law. Clayton turned back to Rhett. Now, you can come along peaceful, or we can do this the hard way. Either works for me. Rhett glanced at the 6 men, measuring distances, angles, odds. 6 against 1 wasn't impossible. He'd faced worse, but it was messy. And in a confined space like this, with Mara in the crossfire, messy could get people killed. He stood slowly, hands away from his gun. What happens if I come along peaceful? You sit in a cell until we can arrange a trial. Shouldn't take more than a few weeks, maybe a month. Clayton's tone made it clear what kind of trial that would be. The kind where the verdict was decided before the gavel fell. And if I don't? Then we drag you out of here. Might be some collateral damage in the process. Clayton's eyes flicked to Mara. Accidents happen. The threat was plain. Resist, and they'd burn the place down around him. Maybe literally. Rhett could feel Mara's eyes on him, could sense her fear mixing with fury. She wanted to fight, but she knew the cost. They all did. He raised his hand slowly, palms out. No need for accidents. I'll come along. Clayton looked almost disappointed. Smart choice. Boys, take his gun. The scarred one moved forward, hand outstretched. Rhett held still, letting him unbuckle the gun belt and lift the Colt from its holster. The loss of the weapon's weight felt wrong, like missing a limb. Anything else? The scarred man asked Clayton. Check his boots and pat him down, properly. They did. Found a knife in his boot, took that too. Patted him down rough enough to be humiliating, their hands invasive and deliberate. Rhett endured it without flinching, his face blank, his mind working. He's clean, the young one said. Good, cuff him. Iron cuffs clicked around Rhett's wrists, tight enough to bite. Clayton stepped closer, his breath sour with tobacco and malice. You made a big mistake coming here, he said quietly. Bigger one sticking around, but don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to think about it where you're going. Rhett met his eyes, steady and unflinching. I've survived worse than you. We'll see. They marched him out of the saloon, 2 men in front, 4 behind. Clayton leading the procession like this was some kind of victory parade. People watched from windows and doorways, their faces pale and resigned. Nobody moved to help. Nobody spoke. Mara stood on the porch of the broken wheel, her hands gripping the railing hard enough to turn her knuckles white. Her eyes met Rhett's for just a second, long enough for him to see the guilt and helplessness there. He gave her the smallest nod. Not reassurance, just acknowledgement. Then they turned the corner, and she was gone. The jail was a squat stone building near the center of town, windowless and solid as a tomb. Inside, it smelled like sweat and old fear. 2 cells sat in the back, separated by iron bars. One was empty. The other held a man curled on a thin mattress, unconscious or asleep. They shoved Rhett into the empty cell and locked the door with a heavy clang. Clayton dismissed most of the men, but kept the scarred one and the young one with him. You 2 stay here, Clayton said. Watch him. He so much as looks at you wrong, you put a bullet in him and say he tried to escape. The young one grinned. The scarred man just nodded, his expression flat. Clayton turned to Rhett. Comfortable? Rhett sat down on the bench that passed for a bed. The wood was rough and splintered. I've had worse accommodations. You'll have plenty of time to get used to it. Clayton tapped the bars with his knuckles. Mr. Kane's coming back to town in 3 days. He'll want to meet you personally. Hear about the man who had the nerve to draw on his people. Looking forward to it. You should be terrified. Clayton leaned closer. Kane's not like me. I get angry. I hit people. Kane gets angry, he destroys them, slowly. Makes sure everyone watches. Makes sure they remember. Sounds like a charming fellow. Clayton's smile vanished. Keep talking, smartass. See where it gets you. He left, boots echoing on the stone floor. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving Rhett alone with his 2 guards. The young one pulled up a chair and sat backward on it, arms draped over the back. You really thought you could come in here and play hero? Rhett didn't answer. I'm talking to you. Still nothing. The scarred man put a hand on the young one's shoulder. Leave it. He ain't worth the effort. I just want to know what he was thinking, coming into our town, pulling iron on Clayton like he's somebody. The young one stood up, walked closer to the bars. You ain't nobody. Just another drifter who thought he was tough. Now you're going to rot in here until Kane decides what to do with you. And trust me, it ain't going to be pleasant. Rhett leaned back against the wall, eyes closed. You done? I'm just getting started. Sit down, the scarred man said. His voice was quiet but carried weight. We're here to watch him, not talk him to death. The young one scowled but obeyed, dropping back into his chair with a huff. The hours crawled by. Morning turned to afternoon, the light from the high window shifting across the cell floor in inches. The man in the other cell woke up once, groaned, and went back to sleep. The guards played cards, their conversation low and sporadic. Rhett used the time to think. Being arrested wasn't ideal, but it wasn't a disaster either. Clayton thought he was neutralized, which meant he'd get careless. And 3 days until Kane arrived meant 3 days to figure out a way out of this mess. The question was how. He had no weapons, no allies, and no clear plan. But he had time. And time, if you used it right, was its own kind of weapon. Late afternoon, the door opened and someone new walked in. A woman, maybe 40, carrying a tray with food and water. She moved carefully, like she was afraid of tripping, and her eyes stayed fixed on the ground. The scarred man stood up. About time. He's been whining about being hungry for an hour. That was a lie. Rhett hadn't said a word, but the woman didn't argue. She just set the tray down on the table and stepped back. Open the slot, the young one said. The scarred man unlocked a small metal slot at the base of the cell door and slid the tray through. Watery soup and a piece of hard bread. Not much, but Rhett wasn't in a position to complain. The woman turned to leave, then hesitated. She glanced at Rhett just for a second, and something passed across her face. Recognition, maybe, or pity. Move along, the scarred man said. She hurried out. Rhett ate slowly, making the food last, his mind still working through possibilities. The woman's hesitation stuck with him. That look, like she knew something. Night fell. The guards changed shifts. The young one left, replaced by a different man, older and quiet. The scarred man stayed, sitting in the corner, half asleep. Rhett lay on the bench, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town settling into darkness. Somewhere outside, a dog barked. Voices rose and fell, the ordinary rhythms of life continuing despite everything. He thought about Mara's question from earlier. Why was he doing this? Why risk his life for people he didn't know? The truth was complicated. Part of it was stubbornness. He'd never been good at backing down. Part of it was guilt for all the times he had backed down, all the people he'd walked away from who'd needed help. But mostly, it was simpler than that. He was tired of running, tired of being the man who passed through towns and left nothing behind but dust, tired of the ghosts. If he was going to make a stand, it might as well be here, for a broken town and a woman trying to hold on to the last piece of her father's dream, for people who'd forgotten what hope looked like. It wasn't much of a reason, but it was enough. Footsteps outside the door, quiet, careful. Rhett opened his eyes but didn't move. The door cracked open. The woman from earlier slipped inside, moving like a shadow. She pressed a finger to her lips, glancing at the two guards. Both were asleep now, the older one snoring softly. She crept to the cell, pulled a key from her apron, and unlocked the door with barely a sound. Rhett sat up slowly. What are you doing? Saving your life, she whispered. Mara sent me, said you'd need help getting out. Why would she do that? Because she thinks you're worth saving. Don't ask me why. The woman pushed the door open. Your gun and knife are in the desk drawer. Take them and go. There's a horse tied up behind the building. Ride north. Don't stop until you're clear of the valley. Rhett stood, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. And you? I'll be fine. They won't know it was me. He moved to the desk, found his weapons exactly where she said. The weight of the Colt back on his hip felt right, like a piece of himself returned. The woman was already heading for the door. Go, now. Rhett caught her arm gently. What's your name? Does it matter? Yeah, it does. She hesitated. Ruth? Thank you, Ruth. She nodded once, then slipped out into the night. Rhett took one last look at the sleeping guards, then followed her into the darkness. The town was quiet, most windows dark, most doors locked. He moved through the shadows, keeping to the alleys, his hand on his gun. The horse was where Ruth said it would be, a sturdy roan, saddled and ready. He was about to mount when a voice stopped him. Leaving already? Mara stepped out of the shadows, arms crossed. She looked angry and relieved, and something else he couldn't quite name. Thought that's what you wanted, Rhett said. I wanted you alive. Figured that meant getting you out of town before Kane showed up. She moved closer. But I didn't think you'd actually go. Why not? Because I saw the way you looked at this place, like you recognized it. Like maybe you've been running from towns like this your whole life and you're tired of it. Rhett didn't deny it. What do you want from me, Mara? I want you to leave. Ride north, like Ruth said. Forget about Ember Ridge and Kane and all of it. Live. And if I don't? Her eyes flashed. Then you're a fool, and you'll die for nothing. Maybe. Or maybe I'll give this town something worth fighting for. We can't fight him. I already told you. You said you couldn't win. Didn't say you couldn't fight. Rhett stepped closer. What if I told you there was a way to beat him? Not with guns, with leverage. With the one thing men like Kane can't stand to lose. And what's that? Control. Reputation. The illusion that they're untouchable. Could see the idea forming in her eyes, doubt mixing with something that might have been hope. Kane's coming back in 3 days. That gives us time to prepare. Time to turn this into a fight on our terms. You're insane. Probably. But I'm also right. He offered his hand. Help me. Show me everything you know about Kane's operation. His businesses, his weaknesses, the people who work for him. We find the cracks. We exploit them. We make him bleed. Mara stared at his hand like it was a loaded gun. Then, slowly, she took it. This is a mistake, she said. Maybe, but it's ours. They stood there in the darkness, hands clasped, the weight of what they'd just agreed to settling over them like a storm about to break. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck midnight. 3 days until Kane arrived. 3 days to build a rebellion from nothing. 3 days to change the rules. The game had just begun. They moved the roan to a shed behind the broken wheel and covered it with old canvas tarps. By the time the first gray light touched the horizon, Rhett was hidden in one of the empty rooms upstairs, and Mara was downstairs scrubbing tables like it was any other morning. The alarm went up an hour after dawn. Shouts from the direction of the jail, boots pounding through the streets, Clayton's voice bellowing orders. Rhett watched from behind a crack in the curtains as men scattered through town, kicking in doors, searching alleys, their faces twisted with fury and panic. Mara appeared in the doorway with coffee and bread. They'll search here eventually. Let them. Rhett took the coffee. They're looking for a man on the run. Someone hiding doesn't fit the pattern. That's insane logic. It's the only kind that works. He bit into the bread. It was stale but edible. Tell me about Kane's operations. Everything you know. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, her exhaustion visible in the set of her shoulders. He's got 5 main income streams in Ember Ridge. The land leases, most of the farmland around here is his, rented out at rates that keep people just barely surviving. The supply contracts, anyone who wants to ship goods in or out goes through his wagons, his rates. The water rights, he controls the 2 wells that don't run dry in summer. The saloon and boarding house fees, protection money basically, and the loan business. Loan business? He lends money at rates that guarantee people can't pay back. When they default, he takes whatever collateral they put up. Land, usually. That's how he got most of his holdings to begin with. She rubbed her face. It's a system. Every piece supports the others. You can't attack one without the whole thing collapsing on you. Or collapsing on him, Rhett said quietly. Mara looked up. What? A system that interconnected is strong, but it's also fragile. Pull the right thread, the whole thing unravels. He set down the coffee cup. The loan business. Where does he keep the records? In that brick building, Kane Enterprises, under lock and key, guarded 24 hours. What about copies, backups? Mara thought for a moment. Clayton probably has copies of some contracts, for enforcement purposes. And there's a clerk, Walter Sims, who handles the bookkeeping. He'd have records too. Where's Sims live? Small house on the east side, lives alone, keeps to himself. She stood up abruptly. Wait, you're not seriously thinking about breaking into his house? Not thinking about it, planning it. That's suicide. Even if you got the records, what good would they do? Kane owns the law, he owns the courts. You can't just wave some papers and expect justice. I'm not looking for justice, Rhett said. I'm looking for leverage. Before Mara could argue further, footsteps thundered up the stairs. She barely had time to push Rhett toward the closet before Clayton burst through the door, the scarred man right behind him. Clayton's eyes swept the room, landing on Mara. Where is he? Where's who? Her voice was steady, bored even. Don't play games with me. Clayton crossed the room in 3 strides, got right in her face. The prisoner escaped. Someone helped him. I know it, and I know you're involved. That's a serious accusation, Sheriff. You got proof? His hand shot out and grabbed her by the throat, slamming her against the wall. I don't need proof. I need answers. From inside the closet, Rhett's hand moved to his gun. The angle was tight, the risk enormous, but he could take the shot, drop Clayton before the scarred man could react. But Mara's eyes flicked toward the closet for just a fraction of a second, and her expression said one thing clearly. Don't. You're choking me, she gasped out. Can't talk. If I'm dead. Clayton held her there a moment longer, then released her. She slumped against the wall, coughing, hand at her throat. I'm watching you, Clayton said. Every move you make, every person you talk to. You so much as breathe wrong, I'll know about it. He turned to leave, then paused. And when we find him, and we will find him, you're going to wish you'd never gotten involved. They left. Footsteps receding down the stairs, out into the street. Mara stayed against the wall, breathing hard. Rhett emerged from the closet. You all right? She nodded, though her hand was shaking when she touched her throat. He's going to be watching. Everything I said about being careful, double it now. Then we move tonight, before he tightens the net any further. Move where? To do what? Sim's house. We get those records, we get ammunition. Rhett checked the window again. The search was spreading, men moving in pairs, methodical. But first I need to know more about Kane himself, his habits, his weaknesses. What matters to him besides money? Mara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, remembering. 3 years ago, before everything went completely to hell, Kane threw a party here. Brought in musicians, fancy food, invited every landowner in the valley. My father was still alive then, and Kane tried to buy this place. Offered good money, respectful terms. My father said no. What happened? Kane didn't get angry, didn't threaten. He just smiled and said he respected a man who knew the value of his legacy. Then he spent the rest of the night playing cards with the other landowners, winning hand after hand. Not cheating, at least not obviously, just outplaying everyone at the table. She looked at Rhett. He loves games, loves showing people he's smarter than them. It's not just about winning for him, it's about dominance, proving he's untouchable. Rhett felt something click into place. He's a gambler. More than that, he's a collector of victories. Every piece of land he takes, every business he crushes, it's another trophy, another proof that he can't be beaten. Then that's how we get to him, not with guns, with a game he can't resist. Mara shook her head slowly. You're talking about challenging him directly. That's exactly what he wants. He'll destroy you. Only if he's better than me. You can't possibly think you can outplay Kane at cards. The man's been gambling professionally for 20 years. Rhett smiled, and there was something cold in it. I've been gambling with my life a lot longer than that. The day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Rhett stayed hidden while Mara conducted business as usual, serving the handful of customers who drifted in, maintaining the facade that nothing had changed. But every hour, the tension wound tighter. Every sound of boots on the street could be Clayton returning. Every shadow could be the moment the plan fell apart. Late afternoon, Ruth appeared at the back door with supplies wrapped in cloth. She moved quickly, nervously, glancing over her shoulder. Clayton's got men posted at every road out of town, she whispered to Mara. They're checking wagons, searching anyone who tries to leave. The whole town's locked down. How are they explaining it? Dangerous fugitive. Wanted for assault. They're saying he might take hostages. Ruth's eyes flicked upward toward where she knew Rhett was hiding. Half the town's terrified. The other half what? The other half is asking questions. Why is Clayton so desperate to find one man? What's he so afraid of? Ruth set down the supplies. People are starting to talk. Not openly, but in whispers. It's been a long time since anyone stood up to Kane's people. Some folks are remembering what that looks like. Mara touched Ruth's arm. Be careful. If Clayton finds out you helped, he won't. Ruth straightened her shoulders. I've been invisible my whole life. One of the benefits of being nobody important. She turned to leave, then paused. Whatever you're planning, do it soon. Clayton's getting more paranoid by the hour. He knows someone in town helped the prisoner escape, and he's making lists. After Ruth left, Mara brought the supplies upstairs. Salt pork, dried beans, a canteen of water, survival rations. We can't stay here much longer, she said. We won't have to. Rhett was studying a rough map he'd sketched on a piece of paper, marking out the streets of Ember Ridge. Tonight we move. You know which house Sims is? East side, 4th Street. Only house with a green door. Guards? Sims isn't important enough to guard. Clayton probably has men watching the main roads, but the houses themselves? She shook her head. He's relying on fear to keep people in line. Good. Fear makes people predictable. Rhett folded the map. Here's how it works. 2 hours after midnight, when Clayton's men are tired and bored. I go in alone, get the records, get out. You stay here, maintain your cover. If something goes wrong, you're dead and I'm next. Mara's voice was flat. I'm coming with you. Too risky. It's my town, my fight. You don't get to shut me out now. They locked eyes, 2 stubborn wills colliding. Finally, Rhett nodded. Fine, but you do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments. Same goes for you. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Midnight came slow and heavy. They waited until the town settled into its uneasy sleep, until the last lamps went dark and the streets emptied. Then they slipped out the back door of the broken wheel, moving through the shadows like ghosts. The night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. A dog barked somewhere, but the sound was distant, uninterested. Rhett and Mara kept to the alleys, avoiding the main streets where Clayton's men patrolled. The house with the green door sat alone at the end of a dirt path, separated from its neighbors by empty lots overgrown with weeds. No lights in the windows. No movement. Rhett studied it from the cover of a collapsed fence. You sure Sims lives alone? Unless something changed in the last week. Wait here, I'll circle around, check for watchers. He moved through the darkness with practiced ease, years of similar nights making his steps silent and sure. The back of the house was dark, the windows shuttered. No signs of guards or lookouts. Either Clayton didn't think Sims needed protection, or he was stretched too thin trying to lock down the whole town. Rhett returned to where Mara waited. Clear, stay behind me. Watch the street. Anyone comes, you whistle once, soft. They approached the house together. The front door was locked, but it was old wood and an older lock. Rhett pulled a thin piece of metal from his boot, not quite a lockpick, but close enough, and worked it into the mechanism. 30 seconds later, the door swung open with barely a creak. Inside, the house smelled like old paper and loneliness. Sparse furniture, everything organized with the precision of someone who lived by routine. A single room served as bedroom and office, dominated by a desk stacked with ledgers and files. Rhett lit a match, shielding the flame with his hand. The flickering light revealed rows of documents, each labeled with names and dates. He started sorting through them, looking for anything that mentioned loans or land deeds. Here. Mara pulled a ledger from the bottom of a stack. Loan records, names, amounts, collateral. Rhett took it, flipping through pages filled with neat handwriting. The numbers told a brutal story. Farmers borrowing money at 20% interest, sometimes higher. Payment schedules designed to be impossible. Foreclosures marked in red ink, property transfers to Kane's name. This is everything, Mara whispered. Every illegal contract, every predatory loan. If we could get this to the territorial governor, we'd be dead before we made it 10 miles. Rhett kept reading, his mind working. But we don't need the governor. We just need Kane to think we might go to the governor. He found what he was looking for 3 pages in. A loan made to a businessman in Copper Bend, dated 6 months ago. The terms were particularly vicious. The collateral listed as a mining operation worth 10 times the loan amount. But what caught Rhett's eye was a note in the margin, written in different ink. Payment received in full, early settlement, CB waived penalties per personal request. Kane forgave a debt, Rhett said. So? So men like Kane don't forgive debts, not without a reason. He showed her the entry. Who's this borrower? Anyone you know? Mara squinted at the name. Thomas Whitmore. Never heard of him. Rhett pulled out more ledgers, looking for other references to Whitmore. Found 2 more loans, both settled early, both with the same notation about waived penalties. Kane's protecting someone, he said, or he owes them. Either way, it's a crack in the armor. A sound outside froze them both. Footsteps. Voices. Mara moved to the window, peeked through the shutters. Clayton. 3 men with him, heading this way. Rhett grabbed the loan ledger and 2 others that looked important, stuffing them inside his coat. Back door, now. They moved fast but quiet, reaching the rear of the house just as the front door crashed open. Sims! Clayton's voice boomed through the small house. Where the hell are you? Rhett and Mara slipped out the back, pressing against the wall. Through the window, they could see Clayton and his men tearing through the room, throwing papers aside, yanking open drawers. He's not here, one of the men said. Then where is he? It's past midnight. Man should be in bed. Maybe he's visiting someone. Or at the saloon. Clayton swore viciously. Find him. I need to know if anyone's been asking questions, poking around his records. The men filed out, heading back toward the main street. Clayton lingered, staring at the desk with its scattered papers. For a moment, Rhett thought he might notice the missing ledgers. But then Clayton turned and followed his men, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Rhett and Mara waited until the footsteps faded, then moved quickly through the back lots, staying low, using every bit of cover the darkness offered. They made it back to the broken wheel just as the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky. Upstairs, Rhett spread the ledgers out on the floor and started reading by candlelight. Mara paced, her nervous energy filling the small room. We can't keep doing this, she said. Eventually, Clayton's going to figure out where you're hiding, and when he does, he won't. Rhett found another entry, this one detailing a payment from Kane to a territorial judge. Not a loan, a bribe. Because in 2 days, none of this is going to matter. What are you talking about? He looked up at her. I'm going to challenge Kane to a game, cards, high stakes, winner takes everything. That's insane. You keep saying that. Doesn't make it less true or less necessary. He tapped one of the ledgers. This is ammunition. Proof of bribery, illegal contracts, predatory lending. If I sit across from Kane with this in my pocket, he's not playing just for money or land. He's playing to keep me quiet, to protect his reputation. And if you lose, then I die. And you burn these records before Clayton gets his hands on them. He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. Mara stopped pacing. You're serious. I've never been more serious about anything. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, weighing risks against possibilities, fear against something that might have been hope. If we do this, she said slowly, we do it right. No half measures. We make it public. Force Kane to accept in front of witnesses. Make it impossible for him to just shoot you and walk away. Agreed. How do we arrange that? Leave it to me. I know people. People who will spread the word if I ask them to. She sat down across from him. But you need to understand something. Kane doesn't lose. Not at cards, not at business, not at anything. You think you can beat him, but you don't know him like I do. Then tell me. Everything you know. Mara took a breath, organizing her thoughts. He's methodical, patient. He doesn't take risks unless he's already calculated the odds. At that party 3 years ago, I watched him play for 6 hours straight. He lost maybe 3 hands out of 50. And the hands he lost? They were small pots, meaningless. Every big pot, every hand that mattered, he won. How? Reading people. He watches everything, your eyes, your hands, the way you breathe. He knows when you're bluffing before you do. And he's not above cheating if he can get away with it, but he's smart about it. Nothing obvious, just tilting the odds in his favor. Rhett absorbed this. What about his tells? Everyone has them. If he does, I never spotted them, and I was watching. She leaned forward. But there's one thing, when he's really confident, when he knows he's got the winning hand, he gets quiet. Not nervous quiet, calm quiet, like the whole world goes still for him. And when he's bluffing, he talks, makes jokes, tries to fill the silence with noise. Rhett filed that away. It wasn't much, but it was something. They spent the next hour going through the ledgers in detail, memorizing names and numbers, building a picture of Kane's empire. The more they read, the clearer it became just how extensive his control was. He owned or controlled nearly everything in a 100-mile radius. Loans, land, water, trade routes, even politicians. But the entries about Thomas Whitmore kept nagging at Rhett. 3 loans, all forgiven. It was the only pattern that broke Kane's otherwise ruthless consistency. I need to know who Whitmore is, he said. Why Kane treats him differently. How are you going to find that out? We can't exactly send a letter asking. Rhett thought for a moment. What about Sims? Clayton's looking for him, which means he's not at home. Where would he go? He drinks sometimes, at the saloon. Never much, just a glass or 2 before bed. Was he here tonight? Mara's eyes widened. No, he usually comes in around 10, but he didn't show. So he's somewhere else. Hiding, maybe, or… Rhett stood up. Clayton said he needed to ask Sims about people poking around his records. What if someone already got to him? Who? I don't know, but in a town this small with this much fear, people talk. Someone might have warned Sims that trouble was coming. Mara grabbed her shawl. I know someone who might know. Mrs. Chen, the seamstress. She sees everything, hears everything. If Sims is hiding, she'll know where. They waited until full daylight, when movement through town would look less suspicious. Mara went alone while Rhett stayed behind, hidden in the upstairs room. The minutes stretched like hours. She returned 30 minutes later, slightly out of breath. Mrs. Chen says Sims went to his sister's place, 2 towns over, Silver Creek. How did she know? His sister came through yesterday, picked him up in a wagon. Mrs. Chen saw them leave at dusk before Clayton locked down the roads. Rhett processed this. Someone warned him, told him to run before the hammer fell. But who? Someone who knew I'd escaped. Someone who knew Clayton would start tearing the town apart looking for answers. He looked at Mara. Someone who wanted those records protected. You think there are others? Other people who want to fight back? Or people who are just tired of being afraid? Rhett moved to the window, watching the street below. A few people moving about their business, heads down, shoulders hunched. But here and there he caught glimpses of something else. Glances exchanged, whispers behind hands, the slow awakening of a town that had been asleep too long. Word spreading, Mara said quietly, following his gaze. About your escape. About Clayton's panic. People are talking. Then we use it, feed the rumors, make Kane think the whole town's on the verge of rebellion. Is it? Not yet. But fear works both ways. If Kane thinks he's losing control, he'll make mistakes. Rhett turned to face her. Tomorrow night. I need you to spread word that I'm calling Kane out. Make it public. Make it impossible for him to refuse. Where? Here. The broken wheel. Neutral ground. Your territory. Mara smiled, and there was something fierce in it. He'll hate that. Having to come to my place, on my terms. Good. Angry men make bad decisions. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Rhett cleaned his gun, checked his ammunition, ran through scenarios in his head. Mara sent Ruth and 2 other trusted people out with messages, carefully worded invitations to witness something unprecedented. By evening, the whole town knew. The stranger who'd escaped Clayton's jail was challenging Kane to a high-stakes card game. Winner takes control of the broken wheel and everything in it. Loser walks away with nothing. Clayton heard about it within the hour. He stormed into the saloon with his men, face purple with rage. You think this is a game? He shouted at Mara. You think you can just… I think Mr. Kane deserves to hear about this opportunity directly, Mara said calmly. A chance to take my property legally, in front of witnesses. Unless you'd rather he keep squeezing me until I break. That's messier, isn't it? Clayton's hand went to his gun, but he didn't draw. Behind him, a dozen townspeople had gathered in the doorway, watching. Witnesses. Mr. Kane's going to hear about this, Clayton said. And when he does, tell him I'll be waiting, Mara said. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. And tell him to bring his best cards. He's going to need them. Clayton left, but not before sweeping every bottle off the bar in a crash of broken glass. After he was gone, the townspeople filtered in, their faces showing a mixture of fear and excitement. They asked questions Mara deflected. They wanted to see Rhett, to confirm the rumors. She told them he'd be there tomorrow night, and not a moment before. When the last of them finally left, she locked the door and climbed the stairs. Rhett was standing by the window, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of blood and gold. It's done, Mara said. The whole town knows. Clayton knows. By tomorrow morning, Kane will know. And he'll come. He'll come. But Rhett, she hesitated. What if this doesn't work? What if he just shoots you the moment you sit down? He won't. Not in front of that many witnesses. It would shatter the illusion he's built, that he's legitimate, that he's in control. Rhett turned to face her. Men like Kane need people to believe in their power. The moment they start acting like common thugs, that belief cracks. He'll play the game because refusing would show weakness. You're betting your life on that assumption. I've bet my life on worse. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd stumbled into something bigger than either of them had planned. Tomorrow would bring violence or victory, or most likely both. The town would either rise or be crushed. And somewhere out in the desert, a man named Kane was learning that his kingdom had a crack in it. A crack named Rhett Vance. Night fell. The town settled into nervous anticipation. And in the room above the broken wheel, a gunslinger and a saloon keeper made their final preparations for a game where the stakes were everything, and the odds were written in blood. Morning arrived with a tension that seemed to thicken the very air. Rhett could feel it from his window perch, the way people moved through the streets with purpose instead of resignation, the way conversations happened in clusters instead of fearful whispers. Something had shifted in Ember Ridge during the night. Some collective holding of breath before a storm that everyone knew was coming. Mara brought him coffee and eggs just after sunrise. Clayton's been riding the perimeter since dawn, 4 men with him. They're looking for any sign you might try to run. Let them look. Rhett ate slowly, methodically. His hands were steady, his mind clear. He'd spent the night not sleeping but preparing, running through every possible scenario, every angle Kane might use. Any word from Kane himself? Ryder came in an hour ago, went straight to the brick building. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, her own coffee untouched. He's coming, tonight, 8 o'clock like we said. How many men will he bring? Hard to say. Usually travels with 6 or 7. His personal guard, all of them trained, all of them loyal. She finally took a sip of coffee, made a face. I've been thinking about what happens after. If you win, and that's a big if, you think Kane's just going to hand over his empire and walk away? No. I think he's going to do exactly what men like him always do when they lose. He'll try to flip the table, change the rules, use violence when cunning fails. Rhett set down his fork. That's why we need witnesses, lots of them. People who'll remember what happened, who'll spread the word if Kane tries to rewrite the story. The whole town's planning to be there. Mrs. Chen's been going door to door all morning. Even people who were too scared to breathe wrong yesterday are saying they'll come. Mara's expression was complicated, hope and dread mixing in equal measure. They want to believe, Rhett. They want to believe someone can beat him. But if you lose, if this goes wrong, it'll break them worse than before. Then I won't lose. You say that like it's simple. It's not simple, but it's necessary. He stood, moved to the window. The town was waking up fully now, and he could see it. That electric quality of anticipation, of people preparing for something they'd never imagined possible. Fear's a prison. The only way out is through the door, even if you don't know what's on the other side. Down in the street, he spotted the old man from yesterday, the one who'd been whittling, the one who'd told him the town was already dead. The man was standing outside the general store, talking to 3 others. As Rhett watched, the old man gestured emphatically, and the others leaned in, listening. Then one of them clapped him on the shoulder and they dispersed, moving with purpose. They're organizing, Mara said quietly, coming to stand beside him. I don't know what they're planning, but they're doing something. First time I've seen people coordinate like this since Kane took over. Good. Let them. The more Kane thinks he's losing control, the more desperate he gets. Desperate men make mistakes. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Rhett spent them checking and rechecking his gun, studying the ledgers one more time, memorizing the patterns in Kane's business dealings. Mara disappeared periodically to handle preparations downstairs, to field questions from townspeople who kept appearing at the door with offerings, food, ammunition, even a bottle of expensive whiskey someone had been saving for a special occasion. They're treating this like a festival, Mara said when she returned from one such trip. Half the town's convinced you're some kind of avenging angel. The other half thinks you're insane, but they're rooting for you anyway. What do you think? She was quiet for a long moment. I think you're the first honest thing that's happened to this town in 5 years. Whether that makes you an angel or just another fool with a gun, I don't know. But I'm grateful you're here. Even if I get us both killed, even then, at least we'll die fighting instead of waiting to suffocate. By mid-afternoon, riders appeared on the horizon. Rhett counted 7 of them, moving in tight formation, sunlight glinting off rifles and polished leather. They came down the main street like a parade, slow and deliberate, making sure everyone saw them. Clayton rode out to meet them, and there was a brief conference before the whole group proceeded to the brick building at the north end of town. That's him, Mara said. She'd gone pale, her hands gripping the windowsill. Kane, the one in the middle, riding the black stallion. Rhett studied the figure. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him. He sat the horse with casual authority, his posture relaxed but alert. Mid-40s, maybe, with dark hair going silver at the temples. Well-dressed in a way that was almost theatrical. Tailored coat, expensive hat, everything calculated to project power and sophistication. The group disappeared into the brick building. The door closed behind them, and for a moment the street was empty, silent. Then people began emerging from their houses, drifting toward the center of town, drawn by the gravity of what was coming. We should go down, Mara said. Start setting up. If we wait too long, not yet. Let them settle in. Let Kane hear the reports from Clayton, hear about the town's mood. Let him stew in it. Rhett checked his pocket watch. 4:30. 3.5 hours until the game. We go down at 7, not before. Mara paced. Ruth appeared once with more food, which neither of them touched. The shadows lengthened across the room. Somewhere a dog barked, and children's voices rose in play, as if this were any other day. But the undercurrent was there, electric and dangerous, a storm gathering force. At 6:30, Clayton appeared at the door of the Broken Wheel with 2 men. Mara went down to meet them. Rhett listened from the top of the stairs, hand on his gun. Mr. Kane accepts the challenge, Clayton said. His voice was tight, barely controlled. 8 o'clock. But there are conditions. I'm listening, Mara said. The game is 5-card draw. No wild cards. Minimum bet of $100. Winner takes the saloon and all associated property, free and clear. Loser walks away with nothing and never returns to Ember Ridge. Agreed. Anything else? Yes. Both players submit to a search before sitting down. No hidden cards, no weapons at the table. Fair enough. Who conducts the search? Neutral party. Someone neither side has leverage over. Clayton paused. We're bringing in Hammond from Silver Creek. He's a town marshal, no connection to Mr. Kane or this place. Mara considered this. Fine. But I want witnesses, at least 20 townspeople in the room chosen by me. Mr. Kane doesn't care who watches. Let them all watch. Let them see what happens when someone challenges him. Clayton leaned forward. Where's the drifter? Where's Vance? He'll be here at 8, not a minute before. You better hope he shows. Mr. Kane doesn't like his time wasted. Neither do I. You got what you came for. Now get out of my establishment. Clayton's jaw worked, chewing back words. Then he turned and stalked out, his men following. Mara climbed the stairs slowly. You heard? All of it. Hammond's a good sign. Means Kane wants this to look legitimate. Or he's confident enough he doesn't need to cheat. Maybe both. Rhett pulled on his coat, checked his gun one final time. You ready? No, but I don't think I ever will be, so we might as well go. They descended together into the saloon. Mara had spent the day transforming it. Tables pushed to the walls, a single round table in the center with two chairs facing each other. Lamps hung from the ceiling, positioned to illuminate the table from every angle. No shadows, no hiding places. People were already gathering. The old whittler stood near the bar with 5 others, their faces set with grim determination. Mrs. Chen sat in the corner with a group of women, their hands busy with nervous knitting and sewing. Joseph, the man from the wagon yesterday, stood by the door with his hat in his hands. One by one, they nodded to Rhett as he appeared, and he nodded back. 20 became 30. 30 became 40. The room filled with the citizens of Ember Ridge, people who'd been beaten down and terrified for so long they'd forgotten what defiance looked like. But they remembered now. Rhett could see it in their eyes. Not hope exactly, but something close. The willingness to believe that change was possible. At 7:50, the door opened and Kane walked in. The room went silent. He was exactly as Mara had described. Polished, confident, radiating the kind of authority that came from years of being obeyed without question. His clothes were expensive but not ostentatious. His face was handsome in a weathered way, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the crowded room with the faint smile of someone enjoying a private joke. Behind him came Clayton and 4 other men, all armed, all alert, and bringing up the rear, a lean man in his 50s with a marshal's star on his vest. Hammond from Silver Creek. Kane's eyes found Rhett immediately. For a long moment, the 2 men simply stared at each other across the room, measuring, calculating. "So you're the famous Rhett Vance," Kane said. His voice was smooth, cultured, with just a hint of amusement. "The man who's been causing all this excitement. And you're Kane, the man who's been bleeding this town dry." Kane's smile didn't falter. "I provide services. People pay for them. That's called commerce. That's called extortion. Semantics." Kane moved to the table, running his hand along its surface. "I hear you think you can take my property at cards. That's ambitious. Foolish, but ambitious." "We'll see." "Yes, we will." Kane turned to Hammond. "Marshal, if you'd be so kind as to conduct the searches, I want there to be no question about the legitimacy of tonight's proceedings." Hammond stepped forward, all business. He searched Kane first, patting him down efficiently, checking pockets and boot tops. Found nothing. Then he moved to Rhett. Rhett raised his arms, let the marshal work. Hammond was thorough, found the Colt, removed it along with the knife in Rhett's boot, the lockpick in his inside pocket. Set them all on the bar. "He's clean," Hammond announced. "Good. Then let's begin." Kane sat down at the table, gestured to the opposite chair. "Shall we discuss the stakes one more time for the benefit of our audience?" Rhett sat. The chair was solid, positioned so he could see both Kane and the crowd behind him. Winner gets the broken wheel and all associated property. Loser leaves Ember Ridge and doesn't come back. Correct. And you're putting up what exactly, since you don't own the property you're wagering? "I'm putting up my life," Rhett said simply. "I lose, you can do whatever you want with me. I won't resist." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Kane's eyebrows rose slightly. "Bold, but the broken wheel is worth considerably more than one life, even yours." "Then consider it a down payment." Rhett leaned forward. "You win, you get me. You also get the satisfaction of breaking the last resistance in this town. You get to prove to everyone here that challenging you is suicide. That's worth more than property." Kane studied him, and for the first time something like genuine interest flickered in his eyes. "You understand leverage. I respect that. Very well. I accept your terms." He pulled a fresh deck of cards from his coat, broke the seal. 5-card draw, standard rules. We play until one of us is out of money or concedes. Agreed? Agreed. Kane began shuffling with practiced ease, his hands moving in smooth, hypnotic patterns. "I should warn you, Mr. Vance, I've been playing cards since I was 12 years old. I've sat across from professional gamblers, confidence men, and cheaters of every variety. I've never lost a game that mattered. There's a first time for everything." "Not tonight." Kane dealt 5 cards to each of them, his movements precise. "But I appreciate your optimism. It makes the victory sweeter." Rhett picked up his cards. 3 of clubs, 7 of hearts, jack of spades, jack of diamonds, 2 of hearts. A pair. Not strong, but workable. $100 minimum, Kane said, tossing a stack of bills into the center. Your call, Mr. Vance? Rhett had exactly $400 to his name, everything he'd saved from months of work and careful living. He matched the bet, folding one of the bills precisely before adding it to the pot. How many cards? Kane asked. 3. Rhett discarded the 3, 7, and 2, kept the jacks. Kane dealt him 3 new cards, 9 of clubs, jack of hearts, 4 of spades. 3 jacks. Strong hand. I'll take 2, Kane said, dealing himself. His expression remained perfectly neutral. The betting round began. Kane raised to 200. Rhett studied him, looking for any tell, any hint of what he held. But Kane was as unreadable as carved stone, his posture relaxed, his breathing even. Rhett called the bet. The pot was now $600. Show, Kane said, laying down his cards. Full house. Queens over 8s. A collective intake of breath from the crowd. Rhett set down his 3 jacks, worthless, against the full house. Kane collected the pot with a slight smile. First blood to me. They played another hand, then another. Kane won the first 3, his leads careful and controlled, never betting more than he needed to. By the end of the 3rd hand, Rhett was down to $200. You play conservatively for a man with so little to lose, Kane observed, shuffling for the 4th hand. I expected more aggression. I'm just getting a feel for your style, Rhett said. My style is to win, consistently, thoroughly. Kane dealt. But please, take all the time you need to analyze it. The result will be the same. The 4th hand, Rhett drew a flush, all hearts. He bet aggressively, pushing 150 into the pot. Kane raised to 200. Rhett called, going all in with his last 50. Kane flipped his cards, straight, king high. The flush beat the straight. Rhett collected $400, evening the score. For the first time, Kane's smile tightened slightly. Lucky draw. Luck's part of the game. So is skill, and I have considerably more of that than you. They played on. The crowd watched in absolute silence, barely breathing, as fortunes shifted back and forth across the table. Rhett won 2 hands, lost 3. The pattern was becoming clear. Kane was better, more experienced, more controlled. But Rhett was learning, adjusting, starting to see the subtle patterns in how Kane bet. When Kane was confident, he got quiet. His bets were smooth, unhurried. When he was bluffing, he talked more, filled the silence with commentary and psychological pressure. An hour into the game, Rhett was down to $300 again. The crowd had grown restless, shifting uncomfortably. They'd expected fireworks. Instead, they were watching a slow, methodical dismantling. Mara stood behind the bar, her face pale but composed. Ruth sat with her hands clenched in her lap. Even Clayton looked tense, though whether from anticipation or concern was hard to tell. Kane dealt another hand. You're better than I expected, he said conversationally. Most amateurs would have been broken by now, but you're holding on through sheer stubbornness. That's what I do best. It's not enough. Stubbornness without skill is just prolonged defeat. Kane arranged his cards. Tell me, Mr. Vance, why do you care about this town? You're not from here. You have no stake in these people's problems. Maybe I'm tired of running. Running from what? Rhett didn't answer. He was looking at his cards. 2 pair, 8s, and 5s. Decent hand. He bet 100. Kane raised to 250. I've made it my business to understand people, their motivations, their weaknesses. You're running from yourself, Mr. Vance. From choices you've made, things you've done. You thought stopping here might give you redemption, but redemption isn't found in gambling your life away. You talk a lot when you're bluffing, Rhett said quietly. Kane's eyes narrowed. Call then, if you're so confident. Rhett pushed in his remaining $50. All in. They showed. Kane had 3 10s. The pot went to Kane. Rhett was broke. The crowd made a sound like air escaping from a punctured lung, disappointment and despair mixing together. Kane sat back, satisfied, ready to collect his winnings. But Rhett didn't stand up. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out the ledgers he'd stolen from Sims's house. I believe I mentioned I'd put up my life, Rhett said, but I didn't say that was all I had to wager. Kane's expression went very still. What are those? Records, loan documents, evidence of bribes, illegal contracts, extortion, everything you've done in Ember Ridge for the past 5 years. Rhett laid them on the table. I'll bet these against another $1,000. Winner takes all. The money, the ledgers, everything. Those are stolen property. Prove it. Take me to court. I'm sure a territorial judge would love to read through them during the trial. Rhett met his eyes. Or you could play another hand. Win, and you get them back. Lose, and copies go to every newspaper and law office within 200 miles. The room was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. Kane stared at the ledgers, his jaw tight, the mask of composure cracking for the first time. Clayton stepped forward. Mr. Kane, you don't have to... Quiet. Kane's voice was sharp. He studied Rhett for a long moment, calculations visible behind his eyes. Finally he smiled, but it was cold and dangerous. You're cleverer than you look. I'll give you that. Fine. One more hand. Winner takes everything, money, ledgers, and the broken wheel. And if I win, you leave Ember Ridge, permanently. You sell your holdings for fair market value to the people who actually work the land. You release everyone from their contracts. That's asking for considerably more than $1,000. Then don't lose. Rhett slid the ledgers into the center of the table. Unless you're afraid. Kane's smile went arctic. I'm not afraid of anything, Mr. Vance, least of all you. He shuffled the cards with sharp, angry movements, dealt 5 to each of them. Rhett picked up his hand. King of spades, 3 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, ace of hearts, ace of spades. 1 pair of aces. Not great, but not terrible. The room held its breath. Your bet, Kane said. Rhett had no money left. I'll bet this. He pulled off his gun belt, laid it on the table. And this. His knife. And this. The pocket watch his father had given him 20 years ago, the last thing connecting him to a life before violence and drifting. Kane looked at the meager pile. Sentimental value. How touching. He pushed a stack of bills forward. $500. Rhett couldn't match it. He had nothing left to bet with. The game was over. But then Mara stepped forward from behind the bar. Wait! Her voice carried across the room. I'll cover his bet. Everyone turned to look at her. Kane's eyebrows rose. With what? He asked. With me. I'll work for you, 7 years, whatever capacity you want. Kitchen, cleaning, upstairs, whatever. But only if Rhett loses. If he wins, the debt's cleared and you leave like he said. Mara, no, Rhett started. It's my choice. She looked at him, and her eyes were fierce. You bet everything for this town. Let me bet something too. Kane considered this, then nodded slowly. Agreed. 7 years of service against $500 and the rest of my stakes. This should be interesting. He looked at Rhett. Draw phase. How many cards? Rhett discarded 3, the 3, 7, and king, kept the aces. Kane dealt him 3 new cards, ace of diamonds, 5 of clubs, 2 of hearts, 3 aces. Rhett kept his face completely neutral. I'll take one, Kane said, discarding a single card and dealing himself a replacement. For just a second, his expression shifted, that quiet, still quality Mara had mentioned, the look of a man who knew he was holding the winning hand. Your bet, Rhett said. Kane pushed everything into the center, all his remaining money, well over $2,000. All in. The crowd gasped. This was it. The final moment. Rhett looked at his 3 aces. Strong hand. But Kane's confidence was absolute. What was he holding? 4 of a kind? A straight flush? The old instincts kicked in, the ones that had kept Rhett alive through countless dangerous moments. Trust your gut. Read the man, not just the cards. Kane was too confident, too still, too certain, which meant he was either holding an unbeatable hand or he was bluffing so hard it had become its own kind of truth. Rhett thought about the ledgers, about the pattern of forgiven loans to Thomas Whitmore, about the way Kane's empire was built on perception as much as power, about how men like him needed everyone to believe they were invincible. I call, Rhett said. Kane's smile was triumphant. He laid down his cards one at a time, savoring the moment. Queen of hearts, queen of diamonds, queen of clubs, queen of spades. 4 queens. The crowd made a sound like a dying animal. Mara's face went white. Clayton actually laughed, sharp and cruel. Kane reached for the pot. A valiant effort, Mr. Vance. But as I told you, I never lose. You're right, Rhett said quietly. He laid down his cards. You don't. 3 aces stared up from the table. The room went silent. Kane froze, his hand hovering over the money. Then, slowly, he looked up at Rhett. That's impossible. Count the cards, count the deck. Everything's there. No cheating, just a better hand. Kane's composure shattered like glass. His face flushed red, his hand trembling. You can't. This isn't. Show's over, Hammond said, stepping forward. The marshal's hand rested on his gun. Game's done. Winner's clear. Time to settle accounts. Like hell. Clayton drew his weapon, pointing it at Rhett. Nobody's taking anything. This whole thing was a setup. Put it down. Hammond's voice was flat. I witnessed a fair game. So did 40 other people. You draw on that man, you'll hang for it. Mr. Kane, Clayton looked to his boss for orders. But Kane was staring at the cards, at the impossible hand that had beaten him, and something fundamental was breaking behind his eyes. The carefully constructed mask of control was gone, replaced by raw, naked fury. You cheated, he whispered. Somehow, you cheated. Search me again. Search the deck. Search the room. Rhett stood slowly. Or accept that sometimes the cards just don't fall your way. Kane's hand shot to his own gun, hidden beneath his coat. But before he could draw, 3 things happened simultaneously. Rhett kicked the table, sending it crashing into Kane's chest. The old whittler tackled Clayton from the side, knocking his gun arm up so the shot went into the ceiling instead of into Rhett's back. And 40 townspeople surged forward as one, a wave of bodies pressing between Kane's men and their targets. Enough! Hammond fired once into the ceiling. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. Next person who draws a weapon gets shot. That includes you, Clayton. The room froze, balanced on a knife's edge between violence and resolution. Kane stood slowly, pushing the table away. His face was a mask of rage barely contained. You think this is over? You think you've won? I think the game's finished and I won it fair. Rhett retrieved his gun belt from the floor, buckled it on. You agreed to the terms. Time to honor them. I agreed to nothing that involves destroying everything I've built. Then you shouldn't have bet it. Rhett picked up the ledgers, held them up. These go to the territorial governor tomorrow, along with testimonies from everyone in this room. You've got 2 choices. Leave voluntarily and sell your holdings for fair value, or stay and face prosecution for bribery, extortion, and illegal seizure of property. You're bluffing. The governor won't. Thomas Whitmore, Rhett said. Kane went very still. 3 loans, all forgiven. Payment received in full, penalties waived. Why? What does Whitmore have on you? I don't know what you're talking about. Then you won't mind if I send him a copy of these ledgers too. Let him see how you've been treating everyone else while giving him special treatment. Rhett stepped closer. Or maybe the governor's office would be interested in why you're protecting Whitmore. What connection he has to territorial officials that makes him worth coddling? Kane's jaw worked. Around him his men stood frozen, caught between loyalty and self-preservation. Clayton's gun was still half drawn, but his eyes kept flicking to the crowd of townspeople calculating odds that weren't in his favor. You're making a mistake, Kane said, but the fire had gone out of his voice. He was already retreating, already calculating his next move. Maybe. But it's mine to make. Rhett gestured to the door. You've got until dawn to clear out of Ember Ridge. After that, anyone associated with your operations gets arrested and held for trial. That includes you, Clayton. Clayton's face twisted with hate. You think you're safe? You think this is over? We'll come back. With more men, more guns. No, you won't. The old whittler stepped forward, and in his hand was the knife he'd been carving with, small but sharp. Because if you do, you won't find a scared town waiting to be pushed around. You'll find people who remember what it looks like to fight back. And there's a lot more of us than there are of you. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Chen stood up, her knitting needles held like weapons. Joseph moved to block the door, his arms crossed. One by one, the people of Ember Ridge arranged themselves into something that looked almost like an army. Kane looked at them, really looked at them, and saw what Rhett had seen from the beginning. These weren't victims anymore. They were people who'd remembered they had a choice. "This isn't over," Kane said, but it was a hollow threat, the last gasp of a man whose power had just evaporated. He turned to his men. "We're leaving. Collect your things from the building. We ride out in an hour." "Mr. Kane," Clayton started. "I said we're leaving." Kane's voice was sharp. "Now." They filed out slowly, 6 men who'd walked in like conquerors and were leaving like the defeated. The crowd parted to let them through, silent and watchful. When the door closed behind them, the room exploded into noise, cheers, crying, laughter, voices overlapping in a chaotic celebration of disbelief and joy. Mara pushed through to Rhett, grabbed him by the shoulders. "You did it! You actually did it!" "We did it!" He looked around at the crowd, at faces that had been gray with fear just hours ago and were now flushed with something like hope. "All of us." Hammond holstered his gun and walked over. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever witnessed, probably both." He offered his hand. "You've made enemies tonight, powerful ones. If Kane has connections like you implied, he does. But connections only matter if people still fear you. After tonight, after word spreads that he got beaten at his own game by a drifter with nothing to lose?" Rhett shook the marshal's hand. "His reputation's shattered. That's worth more than any ledger." "Maybe, but watch your back anyway." Hammond tipped his hat. "I'll file a report with the territorial office. Make sure there's an official record of tonight's events. It might not stop Kane from trying something, but it'll make it harder for him to rewrite the story." He left. The celebration continued, growing louder, spilling out into the street. Someone produced a fiddle. Someone else brought out bottles of whiskey Rhett suspected had been hidden for years, waiting for a moment worth celebrating. Rhett slipped away from the crowd, needing air, needing space. He walked out onto the porch of the Broken Wheel and looked up at the stars. The same stars he'd been looking at for 7 years of drifting, but somehow tonight they seemed different, closer, maybe, or just more real. Mara found him there. "You planning to disappear? Right off into the sunset before anyone can thank you?" "Thought about it." "And?" "Thinking I might stick around. For a while, at least." He glanced at her. "If that's all right with you, seeing as you technically own this place now." "We both own it. You won it, fair and square." She leaned against the railing. "But I'll let you stay in one of the upstairs rooms, free of charge. Consider it payment for saving my life and livelihood." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the celebration happening inside and the sounds of riders leaving town. Kane and his men heading north under cover of darkness, their reign over Ember Ridge ending not with violence, but with the quiet humiliation of forced retreat. "What happens now?" Mara asked. "Now?" Rhett smiled. "Now the real work starts. Property transfers, contract renegotiations, making sure people who lost land get it back. It'll take months, maybe years." "You planning to stay for all that?" He thought about it, about the town that had been dying and was now maybe starting to live again, about the people inside who'd found their courage not because he'd given it to them, but because they'd remembered they had it all along. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Mara smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "Good, because someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed doing something else stupidly heroic." "I'll try to restrain myself." "Liar." They laughed, and the sound mixed with the music drifting from inside, with the stars overhead and the cool night air, with the sense that something fundamental had shifted in the world. Not fixed. There was too much damage for that, but shifted, opened, made possible again. Dawn would come. There would be challenges. Kane might regroup. Clayton might return. The territory was still wild and dangerous, full of men who saw compassion as weakness and justice as an inconvenient obstacle. But tonight, in this moment, Ember Ridge belonged to its people again. And Rhett Vance, the man who'd ridden in with nothing but dust and ghosts, had found something he'd thought was lost forever. A reason to stay. The celebration lasted until dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of copper and gold. By the time the last reveler stumbled home and the fiddle finally went silent, Ember Ridge looked like a town that had exhaled for the first time in years. Empty bottles littered the street. People slept where they'd fallen, sprawled on porches and benches, smiling even in their dreams. Rhett hadn't slept at all. He sat on the steps of the broken wheel, watching the sunrise, the Colt resting across his knees. Old habits. Even with Kane gone, part of him expected retaliation, expected the hammer to fall. But the morning stayed quiet. Peaceful, even. Mara emerged around 6, looking exhausted but alive in a way he hadn't seen before. She sat down beside him, 2 cups of coffee in her hands, and passed him one without speaking. They drank in silence, watching the town wake up slowly. A rooster crowed. Smoke began rising from chimneys. The ordinary rhythms of life resuming, but different now. Lighter, somehow. "They're calling you a hero," Mara said finally. "They're wrong." "Are they?" She looked at him. "You rode into a dying town, took on a man who'd crushed everyone who'd ever stood against him, and won. That's not heroic, what is? Survival, stubbornness, luck." He set down the coffee cup. "Heroes don't run for 7 years before they find somewhere worth stopping. Maybe that's what makes them heroes. They run until they can't anymore, and then they stand." Before Rhett could respond, the sound of hoofbeats cut through the morning quiet. Both of them were on their feet instantly, Rhett's hand dropping to his gun. But it wasn't Kane returning. It was Hammond, the marshal from Silver Creek, riding alone. He dismounted in front of the broken wheel, looking grim. "Trouble?" Rhett asked. "Depends on how you define it." Hammond pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Got a telegram this morning from the territorial governor's office. They received a complaint about last night's proceedings. Someone claimed the game was rigged, that you cheated, and that Kane was forced to leave under duress." Mara's face went pale. "He's trying to reverse it. He's using his connections." "He tried," Hammond interrupted. "But the governor's office also received testimonies from 43 residents of Ember Ridge, all saying the same thing. The game was fair, witnessed by multiple parties, and Kane left of his own accord after losing." He handed the paper to Rhett. "That's an official recognition of property transfer. The broken wheel and all associated holdings now belong jointly to you and Miss Hale, free and clear." Rhett unfolded the paper, read the official language, the stamps and signatures that made it legal. Real. "There's more," Hammond said. "The governor's office opened an investigation into Kane's business practices. Based on those ledgers you mentioned, they're sending a territorial judge to review all his land contracts and loan agreements. Anyone who is coerced or defrauded will have their property restored." Mara grabbed the railing for support. "They're actually doing it. They're actually holding him accountable." "Don't celebrate yet," Hammond warned. "Kane's got lawyers, good ones. This'll drag through the courts for months, maybe years. And he's not the type to go quietly. He'll fight every step." "But he's fighting from a position of weakness now," Rhett said. "His reputation's damaged. His control here is broken. Even if he wins some of the legal battles, he won't get this town back." Hammond nodded slowly. "True enough. But watch yourself anyway. Men like Kane have long memories and deep pockets. He might not be able to touch you legally, but there are other ways to settle scores. I'll keep that in mind." The marshal mounted up, tipped his hat to both of them. "You did something remarkable here. Don't let anyone tell you different." He rode off, heading back toward Silver Creek, leaving them standing in the morning light with a piece of paper that changed everything. The next few days were chaos of a different kind. People appeared at the broken wheel in a steady stream, all of them with questions, problems, grievances that had been festering for years. Property disputes, contract clarifications, questions about what happened next. Rhett found himself thrust into a role he'd never expected: mediator, organizer, the person people looked to for answers. It was uncomfortable, awkward, nothing like the solitary existence he'd lived for so long. But Mara was there, and together they worked through the tangles of Kane's empire, piece by piece. The old whittler, whose name turned out to be Samuel, organized work crews to repair buildings Kane had let deteriorate. Mrs. Chen coordinated food distribution, making sure families who'd been struggling had enough to eat. Joseph took over management of the supply routes, negotiating fair prices with merchants in neighboring towns. Ember Ridge wasn't healed. Not yet. The damage ran too deep for quick fixes, but it was healing, slowly, like a bone that had been broken and was finally set properly. A week after Kane's departure, Ruth appeared at Rhett's door late one evening. She looked nervous, her hands twisting in her apron. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Nothing. She took a breath. "I wanted to thank you for what you did, for all of us. You already thanked me the night you helped me escape." "I know. But I wanted to say it again because—" She hesitated. "Because my husband used to tell me stories about men who stood up to bullies, who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. He died 3 years ago working on one of Kane's projects. Accident, they said. But I always wondered." Rhett waited, letting her find the words. "He would have liked you," Ruth said finally. "He would have said you did what needed doing. Consequences be damned." She pulled something from her pocket, a small carved figure, a horse mid-gallop. "Samuel made this, said it reminded him of you, always moving but choosing when to stop." She pressed it into his hand and left before he could respond. Rhett stood there holding the carving, feeling the weight of it, the care that had gone into each detail. It was the kind of gift you gave someone you expected to stay, someone who'd become part of the community. He set it on the windowsill of his room, next to the pocket watch his father had given him. 2 weeks in, the territorial judge arrived. A severe woman named Harriet Stone, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She set up shop in the old church, converting it into a temporary courthouse, and began the process of reviewing every contract, every loan, every property transfer Kane had executed in the past 5 years. It was brutal work, painful. People had to testify about their losses, relive humiliations, admit to compromises they'd made out of desperation. But Judge Stone listened to every story with the same focused intensity, taking notes, asking questions, building a case that would either restore justice or cement Kane's victories forever. Rhett attended every session, partly as witness, partly as protection. There were still a few of Kane's sympathizers in town, people who'd benefited from his reign or who feared his return more than they hoped for his defeat. Tensions ran high, and more than once, tempers flared into near violence. One afternoon, a man named Davis, one of Kane's former enforcers who'd been left behind when the boss fled, stood up in the middle of a testimony and drew a knife. "This is all lies," he shouted. "Kane gave this town order, structure, and you're all turning on him because some drifter got lucky at cards." He lunged toward the front of the church, toward Judge Stone. Rhett moved before anyone else could react. He caught Davis's wrist mid-swing, twisted it sharply, and the knife clattered to the floor. A second later, Rhett had him pinned against the wall, forearm across his throat. "You done?" Rhett asked quietly. Davis struggled, then went limp. "You can't stop what's coming. Kane's going to return. He's going to burn this whole town to the ground, and you with it." "Maybe, but not today." Rhett released him, stepped back. "Marshal Hammond, you want to take this one?" Hammond, who'd been attending the proceedings as official witness, moved forward with handcuffs. "Assault on a territorial judge, that's 5 years minimum. Hope it was worth it." They dragged Davis out. The room stayed silent for a long moment, everyone processing how close they'd come to violence. Judge Stone adjusted her spectacles, made a note in her ledger. "We'll continue tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Anyone else planning to attack me should know that Mr. Vance appears to be very good at his job." A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. The tension broke and people began filing out, talking in low voices. Mara caught up with Rhett outside. "You all right?" "Fine. Just another Tuesday." "That's what worries me." She touched his arm. "Davis might be locked up, but he's not wrong. Kane's still out there, and men like him don't forget." "I know. So what do we do?" "We keep building. Keep fixing what's broken. Make this place strong enough that when he does come back, if he comes back, there's nothing left for him to take." 3 weeks became a month. Judge Stone worked through the cases with methodical precision, rendering decisions that slowly restored what had been stolen. Land deeds were transferred back to their original owners. Predatory loans were declared void. Families who'd been forced into indentured servitude were freed from their contracts. It wasn't perfect. Some cases were too complicated, too tangled in legal language for easy resolution. But it was justice, imperfect and slow, but real. The town changed. Buildings got repaired. Gardens were planted. Children started playing in the streets again, their laughter carrying on the wind. The Broken Wheel became a gathering place, not just for drinking, though there was still plenty of that, but for meetings, discussions, planning for a future that people were starting to believe in again. Rhett found himself settling into a routine, mornings helping with repairs, afternoons attending the court proceedings, evenings at the saloon, playing cards with Samuel and the others, small stakes and honest games, the kind where losing meant buying the next round instead of losing your land. It felt strange, comfortable, like a life he'd forgotten he could have. One night, after everyone else had left, Mara sat down across from him at a table. They'd fallen into an easy partnership over the weeks, dividing responsibilities, covering each other's weaknesses, but they hadn't talked about anything beyond the practical details of running the saloon and managing the property transfers. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you really stay? After the game, after you won, you could have left, collected your winnings, and disappeared. Nobody would have blamed you." Rhett thought about the question, about the real answer, which was complicated and messy, and had to do with ghosts he'd been carrying for too long. "I spent 7 years running," he said finally, "telling myself I was looking for something, but really just avoiding everything. Avoiding connections, responsibility, the possibility that I might matter to someone and they might matter to me. Because mattering means you can lose things. And I'd lost enough." "What did you lose?" "Everything that mattered. Family, home, the person I used to be before the war broke me." He turned the empty whiskey glass in his hands. "I came here planning to pass through. Maybe rest for a day, maybe not even that. But then I saw Joseph on his knees and Clayton laughing and your father's saloon dying piece by piece, and I recognized it." "Recognized what?" "The moment where you either stand or you spend the rest of your life wishing you had." He looked at her. "I've had too many of those moments already. Couldn't stomach another one." Mara was quiet for a long time. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." The moment stretched between them, comfortable and warm, until the sound of breaking glass shattered it. Both of them were on their feet instantly. The noise had come from outside, from the street. Rhett grabbed his gun, moved to the window. Flames, rising from the old church where Judge Stone had been conducting the trials, smoke billowing into the night sky. "No," Mara breathed. They ran outside. Half the town was already there, forming bucket brigades, shouting instructions, fighting the fire with desperate urgency. The church was old wood, dry as kindling, and the flames were spreading fast. Rhett pushed through the crowd. "Is anyone inside?" "Judge Stone," someone shouted. "She was working late, reviewing documents." He didn't wait to hear more. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth and ran toward the burning building. The heat hit him like a physical wall. Smoke choked the air, thick and black. He could barely see 3 feet in front of him, but he'd been in worse places, survived worse odds. The front door was already engulfed. He circled to the side, found a window, smashed it with his elbow, climbed through, dropping into hell. Inside was chaos. Flames eating the walls, the roof beginning to collapse in places, papers burning, floating through the air like deadly snow. And in the back, near what had been Judge Stone's makeshift office, a figure slumped over a desk. Rhett crossed the room in seconds that felt like hours. Judge Stone was unconscious, blood on her temple where something had struck her. He grabbed her, lifted her in a fireman's carry, and turned back toward the window. A beam collapsed in front of him, blocking the path. Flames roared higher. The smoke was suffocating, his eyes streaming tears, his lungs burning. But he'd come too far to die here, to let this woman die here. He shifted direction, heading toward the back door. Kicked it open. Locked from the outside, he noted distantly, confirming this was no accident, and stumbled into the cool night air. Hands grabbed Judge Stone, pulled her away. Someone threw a blanket over Rhett's shoulders, though he wasn't on fire. Someone else pressed water into his hands. He drank it, coughing, watching the church burn. The bucket brigade kept working, but it was too late. The building was lost. All they could do now was keep the fire from spreading to the neighboring structures. Judge Stone came to, coughing violently. "The documents," she gasped. "All the evidence. Gone, Rhett said. I'm sorry. She sagged, despair washing over her face. That was months of work. Testimonies, contracts, proof. Without it, I can't enforce the property restorations. Kane's lawyers will tear apart anything I try to file based on memory alone. Rhett looked at the burning church, at the flames consuming years of injustice and the hope of setting it right. This wasn't an accident. This was a message, a warning. Kane might have lost the battle, but he was making sure the war couldn't be won. The fire burned through the night. By morning, all that remained was a blackened skeleton and ash. People gathered in the street, staring at the ruins, the reality sinking in. Without the evidence, without the legal backing, everything they'd worked for could be challenged. Kane's lawyers would argue Judge Stone had no authority to make changes without proper documentation. The territorial governor might be forced to reverse the decisions. Ember Ridge had won its freedom, only to watch it burn away. We can testify again, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Tell everything we told before. Without documentation, it's just words against words, Judge Stone said. She looked exhausted, defeated. And Kane has better lawyers than we have witnesses. The crowd dispersed slowly, people returning to their homes, their shoulders slumped. The brief spark of hope guttering out. Rhett stood in front of the ruins, his mind working. Something about this felt wrong. Not the fire itself, that made sense as retaliation, but the timing, the precision. Whoever did this knew exactly where the documents were, he said to Mara. Knew Judge Stone would be working late, knew how to lock the door from outside. You think it was someone from town? I think it was someone who had access to the church, someone people wouldn't question seeing around there. They looked at each other, the same realization dawning. Davis, Mara said, he's been in custody, but he's got friends. People who were loyal to Kane, who've been waiting for a chance to strike back. Rhett started walking toward the building where Hammond had set up his temporary office. We need to find out who Davis has been talking to. Hammond was already thinking the same thing. I've had him isolated since the attack on Judge Stone, but before that, he was in a holding cell with 2 other men arrested for drunk and disorderly. Either of them could have carried messages. Who were they? Hammond checked his log. Marcus Webb and Thomas Killian, both released 4 days ago. Where are they now? Webb left town, headed west, said he was going to find work in the silver mines. Killian, Hammond frowned. Killian's still here. Works odd jobs, lives in a shack on the east side. Rhett and Hammond found Killian's shack an hour later. The door was open, swinging in the breeze. Inside, the place was empty except for a few pieces of furniture and a bedroll. On the table sat a small leather pouch. Rhett opened it. Gold coins spilled out, more money than a man doing odd jobs should have. Payment, Hammond said, for the fire. Where would he go? Rhett asked. If he knew we'd figure it out, where would he run? Hammond thought. Marcus Webb. If they were working together, Killian might try to meet up with him. The silver mines are a good place to disappear. How far? 2 days hard ride west. Rhett was already moving toward the door. Then we leave now. We? Mara's voice came from behind them. She stood in the doorway, a rifle in her hands. You're not going alone. Mara? Don't. You've been fighting my battles since you got here. Let me fight one of yours. She looked at Hammond. You coming, Marshal? Hammond glanced between them, then nodded slowly. Someone needs to make sure this doesn't turn into a bloodbath. And I've got jurisdiction over the whole territory, so technically, this is my job. They rode out within the hour, Rhett, Mara, Hammond, and Samuel, who insisted on coming despite his age because, as he put it, I've been waiting 5 years to hit something that deserved it. The trail west was brutal. Hard ground, little water, heat that hammered down like a fist. But they pushed through, covering ground quickly, driven by the knowledge that every hour gave Killian more time to disappear. They reached the mining camp at dusk on the second day. It was a rough place, a collection of tents and shacks clinging to the side of a mountain, populated by men who'd come here to escape their pasts or build new futures. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Hammond flashed his badge at the camp supervisor, a grizzled man with a face like old leather. Looking for 2 men, Thomas Killian and Marcus Webb. They come through here? The supervisor spat tobacco juice. Maybe. What's it worth to you? The satisfaction of not being arrested for harboring fugitives, Hammond said flatly. The supervisor considered this, then pointed toward the north end of camp. Got 2 new guys in the last couple of days, keeping to themselves, which usually means they're running from something. Tent 47. They found Tent 47 easily enough. A lamp burned inside, shadows moving against the canvas. Rhett drew his gun, motioned for the others to circle around. Killian, Hammond called out. This is Marshal Hammond. You're under arrest for arson and attempted murder. Come out with your hands up. For a moment, nothing. Then a voice from inside. Go to hell! A gunshot tore through the canvas, missing Hammond by inches. The camp erupted, miners scattered, diving for cover. More shots from inside the tent, wild and panicked. Rhett moved fast, circling to the back of the tent. He cut through the canvas with his knife, rolled inside just as Killian was reloading. The man spun, tried to bring the gun up. Rhett knocked it aside, slammed him against the tent pole, gun barrel pressed under his chin. Where's Webb? Rhett demanded. I don't... Rhett pressed harder. Where? He left. Yesterday. Said he was heading to the territorial capital, going to report to Kane. Report what? That the job was done. That the evidence was destroyed. Killian was shaking, tears streaming down his face. Please, I was just following orders. I didn't want to... You burned down a church with a woman inside, Rhett said quietly. You destroyed evidence that would have given people back their lives. And you did it for money. I needed it. My family's starving. I owed debts. We all got problems. Doesn't make you special. Rhett pulled him upright, shoved him toward the tent entrance. Marshal, he's yours. Hammond took Killian into custody. Mara and Samuel emerged from the shadows, weapons lowered. Webb's heading to the capital, Mara said. If he reaches Kane, if he confirms the evidence is destroyed, Kane will know he can move against us, Rhett finished. He'll challenge the property transfers, tie everything up in courts we can't afford. And even if we win eventually, it'll take years. By then, people will have given up or moved on. So what do we do? Samuel asked. Rhett looked west, toward where the territorial capital lay another 3 days' ride. Then he looked back east, toward Ember Ridge, toward the town that was counting on them. We split up, he said. Hammond, you take Killian back to Ember Ridge. Make sure Judge Stone gets his confession on record. It won't replace the burned documents, but it's proof of arson and conspiracy. Might be enough to keep the property transfers valid while we rebuild the case. And you? I'm going after Webb. If I can catch him before he reaches Kane, maybe I can stop this before it spreads. That's 3 days' hard ride, Mara said. You'll kill your horse trying to catch him. Then I'll get a new horse. He looked at her. I need you to go back with Hammond. Make sure the town stays together. Keep people from losing hope. And if you don't catch Webb, if Kane comes back while you're gone, then you do what you did before I showed up. You hold the line. He gripped her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, Mara. This town is stronger than it thinks. You don't need me to survive. Maybe not, but we want you to come back. He almost smiled. I'll do my best. They parted at dawn, Hammond and Samuel riding east with their prisoner, Mara riding with them, looking back once before disappearing over the ridge, and Rhett riding west, alone, pushing his horse to the limit, racing against time and a man who carried the power to undo everything they'd built. The first day was brutal. The second was worse. His horse started faltering by mid-afternoon on the third day, and Rhett had to slow down or risk losing the animal entirely. He traded for a fresh mount at a way station, paying with money he didn't have, and promising to settle up later. The capital appeared on the horizon just before sunset, a sprawling town, almost a city, with brick buildings and paved streets, and the kind of civilization Rhett had been avoiding for years. He rode straight to the telegraph office, hoping against hope that Webb hadn't already sent his message. But the clerk shook his head when Rhett described Webb. Yeah, he was here, maybe 2 hours ago. Sent a telegram west to Copper Bend. The clerk checked his log. Said something about mission accomplished, awaiting instructions. Rhett's heart sank. He was too late. Kane knew the evidence was destroyed. He'd be mobilizing his lawyers, preparing his counterattack. But then the clerk added, funny thing though, he seemed real nervous, kept looking over his shoulder. When I asked if he wanted to wait for a reply, he said no and practically ran out of here. Which direction? North, toward the train station. Rhett found Webb 20 minutes later sitting in the train station waiting room, a ticket clutched in his hand. The man looked up as Rhett approached, and all the color drained from his face. "Please," Webb whispered. "I got a family, kids. I was just trying to survive." By helping a man destroy evidence that would help dozens of other families survive? Rhett sat down beside him. "You knew what you were doing, Webb." "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice. You just didn't like your options." Rhett gestured to a territorial marshal standing nearby. "You're under arrest. You'll be transported back to face charges." Webb sagged. "It won't matter. Kane already knows. He's already moving. You can arrest me, you can arrest Killian, but it won't change anything. He's too powerful, too connected. You can't beat him." "Maybe not, but I can make him work for it. I can make sure every step costs him something, and eventually even powerful men run out of resources." Rhett stood. "Difference between you and me, Webb? I'm not afraid of the work." The marshal took Webb into custody. Rhett sent a telegram back to Ember Ridge. Webb captured, bringing him home. Hold the line. Then he started the long ride back, exhausted but not defeated, carrying a prisoner who represented one small piece of justice in a much larger battle. He reached Ember Ridge 5 days later, his horse limping, his body aching from days in the saddle. But as he rode into town, he saw something that made every mile worth it. People working, rebuilding. A new structure rising where the church had burned. Not as grand, not as old, but solid and real. Gardens planted. Children playing. The town functioning not just as a collection of frightened individuals, but as a community. Mara met him at the broken wheel, and the relief on her face was worth more than any thanks. "You did it," she said. "We did it. All of us." He dismounted, handed Webb over to Hammond. "What happened while I was gone?" Judge Stone used Killian's confession to file an emergency injunction. The territorial governor upheld the property transfers pending full investigation. Kane's lawyers tried to challenge it, but without proof the documents were faked, and with testimony from Killian that he was hired to destroy evidence, the governor sided with us. She smiled. "We won. Not completely, not forever, but for now, we won." Rhett looked around at the town, at Samuel directing a construction crew, at Mrs. Chen organizing food distribution, at Ruth sweeping the steps of the broken wheel with the kind of casual ownership that came from feeling safe in your own home. This was what he'd fought for, not victory in some grand dramatic sense, just the quiet dignity of people living their lives without fear. Of a town healing slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. "What now?" Mara asked. "Now?" Rhett thought about the question, about the ghosts he'd been carrying, the past he'd been running from. They were still there. They always would be. But they felt lighter somehow, less overwhelming. Now we keep going, keep building, keep making sure that when the next Kane comes along, and there's always a next one, this town knows how to stand. "You planning to stick around for that?" He looked at her, at the town behind her, at the life that had somehow snuck up on him while he wasn't paying attention. "Yeah, I think I am." Weeks turned into months. The new church was completed, and Judge Stone continued her work, methodically rebuilding the case files from testimony and memory. Kane's lawyers kept fighting, kept filing motions and appeals, but the tide had turned. The governor's office was paying attention now, and even powerful men couldn't operate in direct sunlight. Word spread through the territory, about the town that had stood up to a tyrant, about the card game that changed everything, about the gunslinger who'd walked in with nothing and given people back their courage. The stories grew in the telling, became legend more than truth. But the truth was simpler and better. It was a town full of ordinary people who'd decided they'd had enough, who'd found their strength not in one man but in each other. Rhett stayed, and the staying became easier. He helped Samuel with repairs. He played cards with honest stakes. He spent evenings on the porch of the broken wheel, watching sunsets with Mara, talking about everything and nothing. 1 year after he'd ridden into Ember Ridge, the territorial governor made an official visit. He toured the town, met with the people, reviewed Judge Stone's reconstructed case files. And in a ceremony attended by everyone who could walk, he formally recognized the property transfers as legal and binding. "What you've done here is remarkable," the governor said to Rhett afterward. "You've given people hope. That's a rare gift." I didn't give them anything, Rhett said. Just reminded them they had it all along. That night, the broken wheel threw the biggest celebration Ember Ridge had ever seen. Food, music, dancing, people toasting to the future, to freedom, to the simple miracle of being able to live without fear. Rhett slipped out around midnight, needing air, needing quiet. He walked to the edge of town, to the ridge where he'd first looked down on Ember Ridge and seen a dying place that wasn't worth saving. How wrong he'd been. Mara found him there, like she always did. They stood together, looking at the lights of the town, at the life they'd helped protect. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Going back to drifting?" "Sometimes. Old habits." He was quiet for a moment. "But then I remember what I was running from. Not places, not people. Myself. The person I thought I'd lost in the war and everything after." "Did you find him? That person?" "No, but I found someone better. Someone who knows that standing still and fighting is harder than running, and worth more." He looked at her. "This town gave me that. You gave me that." Mara took his hand. "Then I guess we're even, because you gave it back to us." They stood there as the stars wheeled overhead and the celebration continued below. A gunslinger and a saloon keeper who'd become something more. Partners. Friends. Maybe in time, even more than that. Behind them, Ember Ridge glowed with lamplight and laughter. A town that had died and been reborn. Not perfect, still struggling, still healing, but alive, fighting, free. And somewhere in the darkness, Rhett Vance, the man with no past and no future, finally let go of the ghosts he'd been carrying. They didn't disappear, they never would, but they stopped weighing him down, stopped pulling him backward. For the first time in 7 years, he looked forward instead of back. And the view was worth everything. The legend would spread, the story of the card game, the burning church, the town that stood against tyranny. People would tell it around campfires, embellish it, turn it into myth. But the truth was simpler and better. It was a story about people who'd forgotten they had courage and one stranger who'd helped them remember. About a town that chose to live instead of just survive. About the power of standing together when the odds say you should fall. Years later, travelers passing through Ember Ridge would see a thriving town. They'd see the rebuilt church, the repaired buildings, the farms producing healthy crops. They'd see the broken wheel, still standing, still serving honest whiskey to honest people. And if they asked about the man who sat on the porch most evenings, the one with the gun on his hip and the weathered face and the eyes that had seen too much, the locals would smile and say, "That's Rhett Vance. He's one of ours." No longer a drifter. No longer running. Just a man who'd found a place worth defending and people worth fighting for. The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and amber. The wind carried the smell of dust and growing things. And in Ember Ridge, a town that had been dying now lived. Not because of one man's heroics, but because people had remembered they deserved better and had the courage to claim it. The story ended not with a bang, but with a breath, with the quiet dignity of people living free, with hope that had been lost and found again. And in the fading light, Rhett Vance smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real, because he'd finally stopped running, because he was home. The desert never forgave, and it never forgot. But neither did the people who survived it, and Ember Ridge would remember, would stand, would endure. And the legend of the man who'd walked into darkness, broke it, and stayed to help rebuild what light remained would echo through the territory for generations. But that was tomorrow's story. Tonight, there was music and laughter and the simple joy of being alive, of having fought and won, not once but every day, against the weight of despair and the temptation to give up. Tonight, Ember Ridge belonged to its people again, and Rhett Vance belonged to Ember Ridge. The circle was complete. The journey was over. The running had stopped. And in the space where fear had lived, hope grew like desert flowers after rain. Fragile, beautiful, real. The end.